It was the summer I turned 20, and money was tight. My boyfriend Dan and I had just moved into our first apartment together. It was small, a little run down, but it was ours. The problem was, I could not find steady work. I cleaned houses when I could, picked up odd jobs, and relied on word of mouth. Dan and his family did carpentry, and he was in the same situation. We scraped by, week to week. That was why we both jumped at the chance when an elderly woman called Dan out of the blue. She said someone from her church had passed along his name. Her husband had passed away before he could finish installing the cabinets and countertops in her kitchen. She needed someone to complete the job and asked if Dan could come out as soon as possible. Dan explained that we only had one car and that I was out running errands with it. He asked if he could come the next day instead. She sounded flustered, insisting it was urgent, but she finally agreed to a visit the following afternoon. As he hung up, he mentioned that she had seemed odd, but maybe she was just lonely. The next day, we drove out together. It was about 45 minutes outside the city, deep into a township known for its old, historic homes. I had always loved looking at the houses out there. Victorian, colonial, some so covered in ivy and moss they seemed like they belonged to another century. The woman's house was small, tucked between overgrown bushes and crooked trees. The lawn had not been cut in a long time, and vines crawled up the sides of the pale gray siding. But it had that strange fairy tale charm that some old places have. We parked and gathered a small bouquet of flowers we had picked up at the grocery store. I thought it might cheer her up, maybe soften whatever grief she was still feeling about her husband. When she opened the door, my stomach tightened. She was tiny, maybe 5 feet tall if that. Her skin sagged and her nightgown, if you could call it that, was stained and thin. The slippers on her feet were worn through at the toes. But it was not her appearance that put me on edge. It was her expression. She smiled wide, but it was the kind of smile that does not touch the eyes. She reached out for me, her fingers long and bony, but I quickly held out the flowers instead. She grabbed them without a word and turned, waving us into the house. The smell hit us the moment we stepped inside. Cigarettes, mildew, something sour beneath it all. The living room was dark. Heavy curtains blocked out the daylight. The furniture was covered in thick blankets, and the floor beneath our feet was sticky. She led us to the kitchen, where a single bare bulb hung from the ceiling. In the corner sat a man. At first I thought he was asleep. Then he stood. He was heavy-set, greasy-haired, and shirtless. His belly hung over the waistband of filthy underwear. His face was stubbled, his skin red and raw in patches. The woman gestured lazily toward him. "This is my son, Marcus." Marcus stared at us, said nothing. Dan asked where the cabinets were. Before the woman could answer, Marcus noticed the flowers in his mother's hand. His face twisted. He grabbed them, and without a word, threw them into a trash bag near the sink. Dan cleared his throat and repeated the question. The woman waved him off. "I thought you were bringing the cabinets." Dan frowned. "You told me your husband already bought them." She stepped closer, her mouth tight, eyes wide. "What is it you're trying to sell me then? What are you doing here?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Marcus stepped between us and his mother. Before we could respond, another man appeared in the doorway behind him. He was just as filthy as Marcus, wearing nothing but stained underwear. His face was blank, his arms crossed. He stared directly at me. I tried to step behind Dan. Marcus suddenly shouted at his mother. She moved back toward the living room. The two men remained, blocking both exits from the kitchen. Dan placed himself between me and them. His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "We're going to go now." Neither man moved. Then Marcus took a step forward. Dan grabbed my wrist. That was when the second man dropped his arms. His hand moved down into his underwear. I realized, with a sick rush, what he was doing. Dan's entire body stiffened. He said something under his breath, something sharp and furious, and then raised his voice, saying something so wild and violent that both men froze. Marcus turned, and pushed his brother backward out of the kitchen. Dan kept his body between them and me as we backed toward the door. I could hear the old woman muttering to herself in the other room. As soon as we were clear of the house, we bolted for the car. Dan drove away so fast the tires threw gravel against the mailbox. We said nothing on the way home. Only when we were back in our apartment, with the doors locked and bolted, did we finally speak. Dan admitted that he had not liked the woman's tone on the phone, but had felt bad turning her down. We both agreed we should have trusted our instincts the moment we walked through that door. We called the police. We explained everything in detail, but the officers told us that since no crime had technically been committed, there was nothing they could do. The men had not exposed themselves fully. They had not physically threatened us. The police said it sounded like the family was dealing with severe mental illness, but did not offer much beyond that. We tried to ask around. We asked people in the township if they knew the family. No one recognized their description. Even the person from the church, who was supposed to have referred Dan, could not be traced. I stopped taking house cleaning jobs after that. Dan stopped taking work from anyone he did not personally know, and I never again judged an old fairy tale house by its charm. Sometimes, when I think back to that day, I wonder what might have happened if we had gone alone. If Dan had answered that call by himself, the way the woman originally wanted, I wonder how many other people they had lured into that dark, filthy house before or after. It was late summer, just a few weeks after Hurricane Irma had torn through our area. I had only recently finalized my divorce, and to be honest, my life felt hollow. I had moved into a small, gated neighborhood where every house was managed by the same rental company. The community was quiet, almost too quiet. Only 15 houses, all circling a man-made lake. Each backyard faced the water, no fences, just open space stretching between the houses and the dark water. My daughter Alice was 4 years old. She only stayed with me every other weekend, but those 2 days became my lifeline. She was the anchor keeping me from drifting too far into the sadness that had followed the divorce. I counted down to the weekends when she would be with me again, filling my house with her voice, her toys, and the small joys only a child can bring. But the hurricane had taken that away too. The power had been out for almost 3 weeks. That meant no air conditioning, no lights, and no visits from Alice. It was too dangerous, too hot, and her mother insisted she stay with her until things stabilized. I agreed, though it weighed heavily on me. When the power finally returned, the neighborhood felt different. There had been a lot of damage, but that was not what unsettled me. It was the emptiness. Some families had temporarily moved out. The few who remained seemed distant, wary, as if the storm had left behind not just broken fences and fallen branches, but something else. Something quieter and harder to fix. That was when the nightmares started. The first weekend Alice returned, she seemed off. She was still excited to see me, but there was a nervousness in her eyes that had not been there before. That night, after I tucked her into bed, she came running into my room in the middle of the night. Her small hands shook me awake. She kept whispering about a lady, the singing lady. At first I thought it was just a bad dream. Children often give names to the things that frighten them. Monsters in closets, shadows under the bed. I sat with her until she calmed down and promised that no one could get into her room. The next morning I searched the room just to reassure her. Nothing was out of place, but the second night it happened again. This time she screamed. When I reached her room, she was hiding under the covers, pointing to the corner. She would not stop trembling. She begged me to make the singing lady go away. That was when I decided to buy a baby monitor. I had not used one since she was a toddler, but it seemed like a simple way to ease both our fears. If she woke in the night, I would hear her immediately. I set it up and showed her how it worked. She smiled weakly and said she felt safer. The next night passed without incident. The weekend ended, and Alice went back to her mother's house. I tried to convince myself that the nightmares were over. I was wrong. The following Saturday, I was home alone. Around 2 in the morning, I woke suddenly. Not from a dream, from a sound. Through the baby monitor, I heard humming. A woman's voice. Soft, melodic, almost gentle. At first, I thought it might be static or interference, but the longer I listened, the clearer it became. A lullaby. The voice grew louder, as if the woman was moving closer to the monitor. My heart began to pound. I was wide awake now, gripping the edges of the mattress, staring at the monitor as if it might explain what was happening. Then the voice spoke. "Alice, sweetie, are you awake?" My blood went cold. Alice was not even home. The room should have been empty. I jumped out of bed, heart racing. I grabbed my phone and called Steve, my neighbor. He was an active Navy serviceman, someone I trusted more than anyone in that neighborhood. He answered immediately. Even before I could explain, he said he would be right there. Moments later, I heard his back door slam open. His voice rang out, commanding and sharp. "Do not move." I ran to the back door and out onto the lawn. Steve stood near my daughter's window, shotgun leveled at someone crouched beneath it. It was Jean, the maintenance worker for the neighborhood. My mind struggled to make sense of it. She stood there, frozen in the beam of Steve's flashlight, her face blank, eyes wide. She tried to explain herself, claiming she had been patrolling for alligators along the lake. She said she had heard something and approached the house to investigate. She insisted she had not been singing, that she had not called out to Alice. But there was no doubt in my mind. She had known my daughter's name, and I remembered something else. During the hurricane, when the power had been out, I had left that window open to let in the breeze from the lake. I had never closed it. Steve's wife came running out, her face pale. They exchanged glances but said nothing more to John. They knew, just as I did, that her story made no sense. Steve walked Jean back toward the main road. She did not resist. She kept talking, but I barely heard her. My ears were ringing. The next day, I added metal bars to the window. Steve helped me install them. We did not speak about what had happened. There was nothing left to say. That night, when I tried to sleep, I found myself listening for the sound of humming. The baby monitor remained silent, but even now, years later, I still sometimes wake in the night, straining to hear a soft voice calling my daughter's name. The next weekend, Alice returned. I debated whether to tell her anything. She was too young to understand, and I did not want to make her more afraid. Instead, I showed her the new bars on her window and told her they would keep her safe from anything outside. She nodded solemnly, her little hands tracing the cold metal. That night, she seemed calmer. We read her favorite storybook together before bed. I stayed with her until she fell asleep. The baby monitor was quiet for a while. At exactly 2:15 in the morning, the humming returned. It was softer this time, almost thoughtful, as if whoever was singing did not want to be caught again. I sat up in bed, frozen. I reached for my phone but hesitated. Jean had already been caught once. She would not come back, would she? The humming stopped suddenly, then the baby monitor crackled and went silent. I lay awake until sunrise, every muscle tense, listening for the smallest sound. Morning came, and nothing seemed out of place. Alice was still asleep, her small body curled beneath the blankets, safe behind the metal bars. But when I walked outside to check the yard, I found footprints in the soft earth beneath her window. They were fresh. That Monday, I went straight to the rental company. I demanded to know why John had been working at night near my house without informing anyone. The woman at the office seemed confused. She told me Jean had resigned the week before. She had not been on patrols. She had no reason to be near my home, and no one knew where she had gone. That was when I started to notice other things. The faint smell of perfume near the window that had never been there before. The subtle marks on the baby monitor, as if someone had tried to move or tamper with it. Alice began mentioning the singing lady again, but now she said something new. She said the lady had promised to take her somewhere special, somewhere by the water. My stomach turned. That night I moved Alice's bed into my room. She protested, saying she did not want to make me sad. I told her it was just for fun, like a camping trip. She agreed, smiling sleepily. But when she fell asleep, her smile faded. In her dreams, she frowned and whispered softly, "The singing lady is waiting." I bought cameras the next day, installed them around the house. I checked the feeds every morning and night. For a few days, there was nothing unusual. Then, 2 nights later, I saw movement on the lake's edge. A figure standing knee-deep in the water, facing the house. I could not make out details. Just the silhouette of a woman, her hair hanging down over her shoulders. She stood motionless for almost an hour before disappearing into the darkness. I stopped letting Alice play in the backyard. I stopped letting her sleep alone. The neighborhood, once a quiet refuge, now felt like a trap. I considered moving, selling everything and starting over. But before I could make any decision, Steve came to my door. He told me that another neighbor's child had started mentioning a singing lady as well. The family 2 houses down. Their daughter was 5. She had woken one night claiming a woman had tapped on her window and asked if she wanted to see the lake. The girl had described Jean perfectly, but there was no trace of Jean. The rental company admitted they had no forwarding address. Her phone was disconnected. It was as if she had vanished. One final incident pushed me to leave. Late one night, I heard a sound not from the monitor, but from my phone. A message. No number. Just a single sentence. "The lake misses you, sweetie." I called the police, showed them the message. They tried tracing it but found nothing. They checked the cameras but found no new footage. I packed up within the week. Alice and I moved in with family across the state. Far from the lake, far from the house, far from the neighborhood that had once seemed so peaceful. Alice stopped mentioning the singing lady. She slept through the night again. But sometimes when we drive past a lake or a large pond, she tenses. She says the lady is still waiting. When I was a teenager, I thought the cemetery at the edge of town was a place of peace. I was not alone in thinking that. My friends and I, most of us outsiders in one way or another, would gather there when we had nowhere else to go. We were not trying to scare ourselves. We were not there for thrill-seeking or childish dares. We just liked the quiet, the distance from the noise of school and parents and everything else that seemed to push us around during the day. I had gone through a phase then, one that people would call goth, though to me it was just what felt right. Black clothes, heavy boots, dark makeup. It was my armor. My best friend dressed the same. She and I were inseparable, spending nearly every weekend together when we were not working or trying to avoid the latest drama in our small town. The cemetery sat a block from a major university. It was old, scattered with gravestones leaning in odd directions, weathered statues of angels whose faces had eroded into hollow expressions. Large oaks stretched their branches like skeletal fingers overhead. When the wind moved through them, the sound could either soothe you or set your nerves on edge, depending on your mood. That night, it was soothing. My friend and I had the hill mostly to ourselves. We sat under one of the old trees, smoking cigarettes and talking about the same thing we always did, our lives, the boys who let us down, the unfairness of being young and powerless. Her boyfriend had been giving her grief again. I listened quietly, letting her vent. I had no advice to give. I had never been good at handling my own relationships, let alone offering wisdom to others. As we talked, the sky shifted from deep blue to black. A few stars pushed through the clouds. It had been raining earlier that day, leaving the grass damp beneath us. The smell of wet earth clung to everything. Then we saw it, a flicker of light at the top of the hill. At first we thought it might be someone lighting a candle at one of the graves. That happened sometimes. People visited late, usually grieving someone and wanting privacy. But the light grew larger, brighter. Soon we could see it clearly. A bonfire. We sighed. Not because we were scared, but because it meant we would probably have to leave soon. Fires were not allowed in the cemetery. It was only a matter of time before someone called the police. The last thing we needed was to be caught trespassing again. The smell hit us next. Not smoke. Something worse. Thick, oily, and sharp enough to make the back of my throat burn. My friend covered her mouth, gagging softly. I just stared up the hill, frowning. It was not the usual scent of damp wood or leaves burning. It smelled like something that should not be burning at all. We stood, brushing grass from our clothes. I wanted to leave immediately, but something kept my eyes locked on the fire. There was movement. A figure stepped in front of the flames. I could not make out details, only a silhouette. Tall, broad shoulders, standing unnaturally still. The hairs on my neck stood up. My friend noticed the change in me and looked where I was looking. She stiffened beside me. Neither of us spoke. We did not need to. We turned and walked toward the car, trying not to draw attention. I could feel the figure's eyes on us, though I could not see his face. The feeling was unmistakable. A weight pressing between my shoulder blades, pushing me faster toward the vehicle. When we reached the car, my friend fumbled with the keys. She got in and turned the ignition. The headlights flared, casting a wide arc across the hill. The figure had moved closer. My chest tightened. My friend saw it too. Without a word, she shifted into reverse and backed down the slope, tires crunching over gravel. The man took a step forward, then another. I could not look away. He stood between the bonfire and the darkness beyond. His arms hung at his sides. No expression, no gesture, just watching. The moment we reached the bottom of the hill, my friend slammed the gear into drive and we sped off, gravel spitting from the tires. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We kept looking back, expecting to see headlights following us. But no one came. Only the black road unwinding behind us. Later that night, after dropping me off, I could not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the smell of that horrible smoke still clinging to my clothes and hair. I kept thinking about the man's stillness. Not threatening, not chasing, just observing. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my mother's voice drifting from the kitchen. She was talking on the phone, her tone serious. She mentioned the cemetery. I sat up, heart already racing. When she hung up, I asked what had happened. She told me there had been a kidnapping the night before. A woman taken from the parking garage near the university. Her body had been found early that morning, burned, left at the cemetery. The words hit me like a wave of cold water. I did not tell my mother what my friend and I had seen. I did not tell anyone for a long time. We both understood what had nearly happened. We had come within moments of walking up that hill to investigate the fire. We had nearly crossed the line between observers and victims. Sometimes, when I dream about it, I see the figure still standing by the bonfire. I never see his face, just the dark outline, waiting. And I wonder if he remembers us too. In the days that followed, the police released very little information. They confirmed the woman had been a student at the university. She had been reported missing shortly before midnight. Her car was still in the parking garage. There were signs of a struggle, but no witnesses had come forward. No security footage showed anything useful. The news mentioned the cemetery only briefly. They described it as the scene where the body had been found, but offered no other details. My friend and I said nothing to anyone. We did not speak of it even to each other. I think we were both afraid that if we acknowledged it out loud, it would become more real. As if keeping silent might protect us from whatever fate we had narrowly avoided. But I could not stop thinking about it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man standing by the fire. His stillness had not been indifference. It had been patience, watching us, waiting to see what we would do. Had he chosen not to act because there were two of us? Or because we left quickly without drawing closer? Or was it because we had left before he was ready? I played the scene over and over in my mind, searching for clues, for meaning. But there was none. Only the undeniable fact that we had been there, that we had seen something we were never meant to see. Weeks passed. My friend and I drifted apart. Not because of what had happened, but because of life pulling us in different directions. Work, school, relationships. The usual distractions that push teenage friendships into the background. But even as everything else changed, the memory of that night did not fade. I began avoiding the cemetery. Even driving past it made my stomach twist. I told myself it was foolish, that whoever had done this would not return to the same place, that the police had likely increased patrols, that it was just a coincidence. But I knew better. One evening, while scrolling through local news online, I came across a brief update on the case. The police were asking for anyone who had been near the cemetery that night to come forward. They believed the killer had used accelerants, which explained the smell of burning chemicals that my friend and I had noticed. I thought about calling them, about telling them what we had seen. But I was afraid they would not believe us, afraid they would ask why we had waited so long, afraid of becoming part of the investigation and drawing attention to ourselves. So I remained silent. That choice has haunted me ever since. Years passed. I moved away for college, started a new life in a different city, but no matter how far I went, the memory followed. Sometimes I would hear about other cases, women gone missing, bodies found in remote places, fires used to cover evidence. The pattern was not confirmed by any official source, but I saw it. Others did too, though no one wanted to connect the dots. The man by the bonfire was not caught. His name was never released because they never had one. In the back of my mind, I wondered if he had simply moved on to another town, another cemetery, another fire. Or maybe he stayed close, blending into the ordinary world, waiting for another opportunity. The most chilling thought was not that he might still be out there. It was that he had chosen to let us go, and that he might remember doing so. If I had walked up that hill, if I had ignored the smell, if we had hesitated even a few minutes longer, my story would have ended with the fire. Not the telling of it, not the memory, but as smoke rising into the night sky, unnoticed by anyone but the man who set it. I started dog-sitting when I was 13. By the time I turned 18, I had built a small business around it. Families trusted me with their pets, their homes, even their alarm codes. I had never had a real problem. There were a few awkward experiences, sure. A house with a bad flea infestation, an elderly dog that passed away in its sleep, but nothing truly frightening. Nothing like what happened at the Brown house. It started with a message through my pet sitting page. A man introduced himself as Mr. Brown. He and his wife needed someone to stay at their property for a week while they vacationed in Florida. They offered me $300 to care for their 2 dogs. I agreed without much hesitation. The pay was good, and I liked the idea of staying in a house instead of driving back and forth. The Browns lived deep in the countryside, their home surrounded by over 70 acres of farmland and woods. That wasn't unusual where I grew up. My own family had 30 acres, and I was used to the quiet isolation. What did concern me was how far away the nearest neighbors were. I knew if anything went wrong, I'd have no one nearby to call out to. Still, I told myself not to be paranoid. These people were offering me work, not trouble. When I arrived, they introduced me to their dogs, Mina and Letty. Mina was a small, hyper Yorkie. Letty was a blue tick hound with kind eyes. The Browns showed me around the house, pointed out where the dog food was stored, and listed the routines they wanted me to follow. Then Mrs. Brown mentioned the neighbor. She described Mrs. Rose as an elderly woman who sometimes became confused. She said Mrs. Rose had mistaken their driveway for her own before. Once or twice, she had even called Mrs. Brown by the name of her deceased daughter. Mrs. Brown assured me it was harmless. If Mrs. Rose showed up, I was simply to point her toward her own home, and she would leave without fuss. The first 2 days passed without incident. I spent most of my time reading on the back porch while the dogs played in the fenced yard. At night, the stillness was almost overwhelming, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of leaves. On the third day, around mid-morning, Mrs. Rose arrived. I saw her car pull into the driveway from the kitchen window. By the time I stepped outside, she was halfway up the walkway. She froze when she saw me, turned without a word, and got back into her vehicle. I watched her drive off down the long gravel road that connected the property to the main highway. That evening, Mr. Brown called. He asked if everything was all right. I told him about Mrs. Rose's brief visit. He chuckled and said she must have gotten confused again. He thanked me for being patient with her. I thought that would be the end of it. That night, after feeding Mina and Letty and locking the doors, I went to bed. Sometime after 2 a.m, a sound woke me. At first it was faint, like a tapping or ticking at the edge of my dreams. As I woke fully, I realized it was coming from the bedroom window. A rhythmic, deliberate scratching. My heart raced. I told myself it was probably a tree branch moved by the wind, but when I pulled back the curtains, my breath caught in my throat. Mrs. Rose stood outside, her face pale in the moonlight. She held a pair of pliers and was working them into the edge of the window frame. Her eyes were wide, glassy, unblinking. The dogs began barking from the hallway. I stepped back from the window, my mind racing. I grabbed my phone and the house keys and hurried to the bathroom. It was the only room without windows. I locked the door, coaxed the dogs inside, and called 911. I whispered to the dispatcher, explaining what was happening and giving the address as clearly as I could. The dispatcher told me an officer would arrive within 10 minutes. I sat on the floor, clutching the phone in one hand and the house keys in the other. The dogs pressed close to me. I tried to steady my breathing, but the fear sat heavy on my chest. From the other side of the bathroom door came the sound of heavy footsteps. They stopped directly in front of me. Then I saw her shadow beneath the gap at the bottom of the door. She crouched down, her face pressing close to the floor, peering in at me. I gasped involuntarily. Mrs. Rose straightened and began pounding on the door with the pliers. The old wood groaned with each hit. I tried to stay calm, but tears blurred my vision. The dispatcher kept speaking softly in my ear, promising the police were on their way. I screamed for Mrs. Rose to stop. She screamed back, accusing me of being a thief, a liar, someone who had broken into her daughter's home. Her words came out in a shrill, furious rush. The pounding continued. The dogs whimpered beside me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the sharp bark of police radios and the shuffle of multiple footsteps. The bathroom door rattled gently. A calm voice told me the police were there. I unlocked the door slowly. Mrs. Rose stood frozen in the hallway. An officer had a hand on her arm, another officer standing behind her. They disarmed her carefully, removing the pliers from her grasp. She did not resist. She simply kept repeating that she was protecting her daughter's house, that I had no right to be there. The officers took my statement. They gently led Mrs. Rose away, still talking softly to her as though calming a frightened child. I stood in the hallway, my legs trembling, the dogs pressed against my ankles. That was the last time I ever dog-sat for strangers. The police stayed for over an hour, checking the house for any signs of damage or forced entry. Other than the cracked bedroom window frame and some deep gouges where Mrs. Rose had worked the pliers, everything appeared intact. But it no longer felt safe. When the officers left, I gathered my things, leashed Mina and Letty, and drove straight to my parents' house. I called the Browns as soon as I arrived. I explained everything in careful, measured words. I expected them to be horrified or at least concerned. Instead, Mrs. Brown sounded almost weary. She apologized for what I had gone through and thanked me for calling the police, but said very little else. By the time I hung up, I had already decided I would not be returning to their property. I would forfeit the rest of my pay if I had to. No amount of money was worth spending another night in that house. A few days later, Mr. Brown called back. He told me that Mrs. Rose had been taken into custody, but was later released. They had learned she had been under the influence of a combination of prescription drugs and illegal substances. When questioned, she claimed she had seen me breaking into her home and was trying to protect her property. She did not remember using the pliers. She did not remember trying to open the window or shouting at me. She was convinced that I had been the intruder and that the police had made a terrible mistake. The Browns insisted they would handle things from that point on. They paid me the full amount we had agreed upon, even after I told them I would not finish the job. That was the last time I ever heard from them. In the weeks that followed, I noticed changes in myself. Subtle at first. I double-checked the locks on every door and window, sometimes 3 or 4 times before bed. I stopped accepting overnight dog-sitting jobs. I started carrying pepper spray in my purse. When I walked alone, especially at night, I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often than I cared to admit. Even now, years later, the memory lingers, not just of that night, but of the expression on Mrs. Rose's face when I pulled back the curtain and saw her at the window. She had not looked like a confused, elderly woman. She had not looked like someone who was simply lost or mistaken. She had looked determined. And when she peered under the bathroom door, she had not seemed surprised to see me hiding there. It was as if she had known exactly where to find me. The sheriff's office later confirmed that the pliers she used had been taken from a small shed behind her home, a shed that had once belonged to her late husband, who had passed away several years prior. They also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the shed contained several other tools. A crowbar, a rusty hammer, a handsaw, all within easy reach. I never returned to that rural property. I never saw Mrs. Rose again. But I often wonder what would have happened if the police had arrived just a few minutes later. Or if I had not heard the scratching at the window until it was too late. I wonder how far Mrs. Rose would have gone to protect what she thought was hers. I never told many people what happened with Blueberry. Not the whole thing, not strung together properly the way it unfolded. For years, the memories sat in the back of my mind like old boxes tucked into a dusty attic. I never opened them. When I finally decided to write it all down, the memories flooded back faster than I could handle. Some details I had hidden from even myself. It took me 2 weeks to finish writing, stopping often to breathe or just to cry. Before sharing this with anyone else, I showed it to my husband. He knew Blueberry, at least in the vague way our old circle of friends did. But when he read my words, he finally understood the quirks and nervous habits I carry to this day. And why. It began when I was 15 years old, sophomore year of high school back in 2003. His real name was Michael D., but we called him Blueberry. No one could quite remember why. Maybe it was to set him apart from the other Michaels. Or maybe someone just thought it sounded funny at the time. Blueberry was tall, awkward, and always looked like he wanted to hide inside his hoodie. His skin was scattered with acne, his jeans always too big, hanging low on his bony hips. He had a habit of walking with his hands stuffed deep into his pockets and his head down, like the world owed him an apology. There was a dimple in the middle of his chin, but it did not make him look friendly. His lips barely moved when he spoke, and most of us could not understand what he was saying. That earned him another nickname behind his back, Michael Mumble. The first time we met, I barely noticed him. We had mutual friends, and someone waved between us and said our names like firing a gun. I smiled, nodded, and forgot about him 5 minutes later. Back then, I was outgoing. Spunky, my mother called me. Bright, naive, and always curious about people. That might have been what made Blueberry notice me. I did not notice him at first, not really. He started by hovering near me before first period, mumbling things I could never quite make out. I smiled politely, nodded, and usually found an excuse to slip away. His presence was not exactly alarming at the time, just awkward. I thought he might be painfully shy. But even then, even at 15, I could sense something strange under the surface. His anger. Other teenagers were angry in the usual ways, hormones, drama. But Blueberry's anger was different. Cold, twisted, like he was angry at the whole world but not loud about it, just simmering beneath his stillness. At lunch, I often walked 2 blocks down to a little sandwich shop called Murphy's, sometimes with friends but usually alone. I liked the peace, the quiet hum of the place, away from the crowded cafeteria. One afternoon I sat in a booth eating a turkey sandwich when Blueberry appeared across from me without warning. He slid into the seat and started mumbling. I kept eating, smiling tightly, pretending to understand. I remember feeling embarrassed more than afraid. Then the notes started. My best friend Christy and I used to write each other paper notes in class. We folded them into neat squares and swapped them between periods. One day, in the hallway where we usually exchanged them, Blueberry tapped my shoulder and slipped a note into my hand. He just stared at me for a second, then walked away. I thought it was innocent at first. His handwriting was surprisingly neat. The words were not. His thoughts tangled and twisted on the page like a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. He wrote about me. Not in a flattering way, in a confusing, obsessive way. Frogs, druids, and nonsense mixed with lines about how he could see my thoughts, how he understood me better than anyone. The notes kept coming, daily. I rarely responded, maybe once or twice, just short, polite replies, hoping he would lose interest. He never did. As the school year wore on, he began giving me gifts. Cheap plastic trinkets at first, then things that made my stomach knot. He handed me a beautiful, expensive leather-bound journal one day. The cover had an ancient map design embossed on suede. Inside, he had filled the first 10 pages with a letter. He wrote about how I was the only one who truly understood him, how he loved me. I was 15. I had no idea what to do. I told myself I was overreacting. My friends brushed it off. Christy even said, "At least someone likes you enough to give you something nice." But the journal went into a box under my bed, along with the notes. I could not bring myself to throw them away. Something about destroying them felt dangerous. Junior year came. I started dating Adam, a boy with bright red hair and a cherry red Volvo that matched. Blueberry faded into the background. I saw him occasionally, stalking across the parking lot, his chin set in frustration, his eyes scanning the crowd. If he saw my car, he would stop and stare. I stopped reading his notes. They still came, slipped into my locker, left on my windshield. Then he left. He graduated, moved away to Colorado, or so I thought. For a while I felt safe again, until the manila envelope arrived. My dad handed it to me one afternoon. "You got mail," he said, flipping the envelope into my hands. I opened it without thinking. The handwriting. My stomach dropped. It was another letter from Blueberry. He knew where I lived. He had hand-delivered it to my house. There was no stamp. I grilled every mutual friend. No one confessed to giving him my address. The letter itself was full of anger. He accused me of breaking promises I had never made. He made it sound like I owed him something, like he had been waiting for me to make good on some imagined agreement. Then, nothing. For years. By 2008, I had moved far away from home. Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was 20, working dead-end jobs and fighting off the last claws of a bad drug habit. My boyfriend and I had split. My social circle had shrunk. Life felt like a long grey hallway with no doors. One afternoon, while using a public library computer to check my old MySpace page, a friend request popped up. Michael D. Blueberry. I do not know why I accepted it. Maybe I thought enough time had passed. Maybe I wanted to believe people could change. His first message came almost immediately. He seemed polite, almost normal. He apologized for how he had acted in high school, said he hoped I was doing well. I replied briefly, thanked him for the apology, and mentioned I was planning to move back to my hometown soon. I also checked his profile carefully. He was still in Colorado, or so it said. The next morning, another message. He was moving back to our hometown too. I told myself it was a coincidence, told myself he would have his own life, told myself he would not be looking for me. But Blueberry had not changed. He had only waited. A few weeks later, back in Texas, I started waitressing the night shift at a Denny's. It was good money, long hours. One night, as I was filling salt shakers before the dinner rush, someone slid into a swivel chair at the counter. Before I could look up, a hand gripped mine, tight. I turned. It was him. His face was fuller, older, but those eyes were the same, dark, watching, claiming. My stomach twisted. My heart tried to crawl into my throat. I smiled politely, nodded, excused myself, fled to the bathroom and vomited. He had followed me, not just to the restaurant. He had come back to town because I was here. I should have told him to get out. I should have called security, should have called the police. Instead, I convinced myself it was fine. He had not done anything yet. I could handle it. That was my first mistake. By the next shift, he was not just a customer. He was hired. Dishwasher. He watched me constantly, tried to corner me behind the counter. Once he grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises shaped like his fingers. He glared at every male customer who talked to me. Once, he muttered a threat about cutting a man's throat. The managers thought he was odd but harmless. My friend said he was just socially awkward. Nobody took it seriously. Not until it was too late. The night it all came crashing down, the restaurant was packed. I was rushing between tables, avoiding him as best I could. My plan was to finish my shift and then tell the manager I could not work with him anymore. When my shift finally ended, I clocked out and ran to my car. The lot was half empty. I jumped into the driver's seat and pulled out. 2 blocks away at a red light, the passenger door opened. He was inside. The lock was broken. I do not know if he had tampered with it or if it had simply failed from age. But there he was, sitting beside me like he belonged there, smiling. Acting like this was normal. Like we had done this 100 times before. He directed me to his house. I was frozen. Every survival instinct in me was screaming to fight or run. But fear had its claws deep in my spine. I drove. His house was hosting a party. Dozens of people spilled onto the lawn, red plastic cups in hand. Blueberry led me inside, past the crowd into his room. He tried to pull me toward the bed, told me he just wanted me to stay the night, to finally accept what had always been between us. But there were too many people around, eyes watching. I pulled back. That is when he snapped, his face twisted with rage. He lunged for me. But before he could grab me, several men and women at the party surged between us. They yanked him away. 3 girls dragged me toward the door, shielding me with their bodies. Their fingernails scratched at Blueberry's arms until he let go. I do not remember running to my car, only that I did, and that I drove without stopping. I owe those strangers everything, but it was not over, not even close. The next day I stayed home from work. My arms were bruised from where he had grabbed me. I kept the blinds closed, doors locked, but fear makes you stupid. I forgot about the back door. The knock came around noon, loud, insistent, not polite. I froze, watched a shadow pass by the kitchen window, then my phone buzzed. A text from a Colorado number. I know you are in there. Come outside. I have your favorite sandwich and a surprise. I wanted to scream. Instead, I grabbed my phone and keys and ran. As I bolted out the front door, I heard the back door creak open. He had gotten inside. I made it to my car, peeled out of the driveway. The next few hours were a blur. I drove to a friend's house, showed them the texts, dozens of them piling up one after another. Some were threats, others were love letters. One included a photo taken inside my bedroom. He had been in my house before, watching me. The police got involved at last. My father, a defense attorney, moved quickly to get restraining orders. They searched my room. I handed over the box of journals and letters I had kept all those years. But Blueberry was gone, disappeared before they could catch him. My father found something else, something he did not tell me until years later. A journal Blueberry had left on our doorstep. Inside were photos of me sleeping, naked. Photos of my ex-boyfriend with his face scratched out. Pictures taken at times I thought I had been alone. I never saw Blueberry again. It has been many years now. Sometimes I wonder if he ever found someone new to fixate on. If he is still out there watching. I do not keep mementos anymore. No boxes under the bed, no saved notes. When fear comes knocking, I do not open the door. I was 8 years old when it happened. Too young to understand how close I had come to disappearing forever. At the time, I thought of it as just a strange day at the campground. Years later, I would replay the details in my mind and realize how lucky I had been. Every summer, my family stayed at the same campground. My mom, my younger brother, and I would set up for weeks at a time. My dad could only visit on weekends because of work, so Monday through Thursday, it was just us. The campground had everything kids could want: a pool, a mini golf course, basketball courts, and other kids to play with. My mom let me wander freely because the place was small, fenced in, and everyone knew everyone. One summer, I met a boy about my age. His name was Tommy. He was camping with his dad for just a few days, but we became fast friends. We spent hours playing by the pool and racing our bikes along the gravel paths between campsites. His dad was quiet but friendly. He always smiled and waved when he saw me. By the time Tommy's family left, I was sad to see him go. His dad told me they might return later in the summer, which gave me something to look forward to. Weeks passed. New campers came and went. I made other friends, but I always kept an eye out for Tommy. One evening, after my mom went to take her usual shower at the bathhouse, I sat by our picnic table coloring in a book. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the campground. Tommy's dad approached. At first, I was happy to see him. He smiled and told me Tommy would be coming later that week. I asked where he was camping, and he pointed vaguely toward the outer edge of the grounds. He asked where my parents were. I told him my dad would not arrive until Friday and that my mom was showering. He nodded thoughtfully. Then he said he had a surprise. He had found a litter of kittens nearby. I had mentioned before that I loved cats, so he thought I might want to adopt one. I was thrilled. I asked where they were. He gestured toward his campsite. I stood to follow, but he paused, then said he had moved the kittens to his truck so they would not get cold. He pointed toward the parking lot just outside the campground's main gate. It never occurred to me that anything was wrong. This man was not a stranger. I had spent days playing with his son. He had always been kind. We started walking toward the gate. Before we reached it, a car pulled up the main driveway. It was my dad. He had gotten off work early and decided to surprise us by coming up a day ahead of schedule. He parked and stepped out, smiling until he saw the man beside me. His expression changed instantly. He asked what was going on. Before I could answer, Tommy's dad quickly said he had found some kittens and was just showing me where they were. My dad's smile disappeared. He told me to go back to our campsite immediately. I obeyed, only realizing as I walked away that his tone left no room for argument. I could hear his voice behind me, sharp, serious, speaking low and fast to the man. I did not see what happened next. My dad returned to the campsite a while later. He told me firmly never to go anywhere alone with an adult, no matter who they were, even if I knew them. I nodded, sensing the gravity in his voice. I did not ask any questions. Years later, when I was a teenager, I brought it up again. My mom told me the full story. After I left, my dad had confronted the man. The friendly mask had slipped quickly. He became defensive, evasive. My dad physically restrained him when he tried to walk away and called the police. The man had no son. No one named Tommy had been registered at the campground that summer. The man had been camping alone. His vehicle contained rope, duct tape, a blanket, and an empty pet carrier. He was arrested on the spot. I never saw him again. I never learned his real name. To this day, I cannot walk past a parked truck without thinking of that moment, of how easily I could have climbed inside. How close I came to becoming another missing child whose name no one would remember. I was lucky, not smart, not cautious, just lucky, and I never forgot it. It was my second year of college when it happened. My roommate and I were both under the kind of pressure only finals season can bring. She could tell I was struggling more than usual. I had just gone through a breakup, and my grades were slipping. She suggested we take a break from the campus and head out to a quiet place she had discovered in a nearby national forest. The forest was only a short drive away. We brought a couple of beers, some snacks, and a blanket to sit on. We were looking for peace, not adventure. The stress of exams, relationship drama, and constant noise on campus had worn us down. We took my car, a beat-up SUV that I trusted more than any person. The drive out there was quiet. Once we left the paved roads behind and started down the dirt paths into the forest, the world seemed to fall away. The dense trees, the distant sounds of birds, the smell of pine and damp earth. It felt like a world apart. We passed some old ruins along the way, abandoned cabins and sheds left behind by settlers long ago. Some of them looked ready to collapse. Others stood firm, but were choked by ivy and moss. Then we saw it. Hanging from a tree by the road was a doll. Its plastic body was dirty and cracked. A length of rope held it by the neck, swinging gently in the breeze. Someone had written something across its chest, but the letters were too faded to read. My roommate chuckled nervously and made a comment about bored teenagers. I nodded and tried not to think about how deliberately placed it was, how much effort someone had taken to create something so unsettling. We reached the clearing she had mentioned. It was a wide, grassy space surrounded by tall trees. The grass was dry and yellow from the summer heat. We parked behind a cluster of bushes, set up the blanket, and settled in to relax. For a while, it was perfect. We talked, listened to music, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight on my shoulders lighten. Then 2 cars pulled into the clearing. At first, I thought it was nothing. Probably other students with the same idea as us. But these cars were not like the typical college beaters. They were large, black, and had tinted windows. 2 men stepped out. They talked briefly, then opened the trunk of one of the cars. From where we sat, partially hidden by the bushes, we could see them pull out a long, heavy object wrapped in dark plastic. They laid it on the ground between the vehicles. Then one of them poured something from a red container. Gasoline. They set the plastic-wrapped object on fire. Thick black smoke billowed into the air. The smell hit us almost instantly, not just burning plastic. Something worse. My roommate and I froze. We barely dared to breathe. Then they pulled out a second object, also wrapped in plastic. One of the men drew a handgun and fired into it. The sound was sharp, echoing through the clearing. They set that one on fire too. My heart raced. My body felt frozen, but my mind was screaming for me to move, to run, to do anything. We stayed low, pressed into the grass, hoping they had not seen us. But the way the taller man kept glancing around made me think he knew we were there, or at least suspected. Then they pointed toward my car. Both men walked toward the edge of the clearing, toward the woods, toward where we were hidden. I whispered for my roommate to get into the driver's seat. We crawled silently back to the SUV. I shut the rear door as softly as I could, but the men must have heard it. The moment the engine roared to life, they turned and started running toward us. One of them shouted something. My roommate floored the gas pedal. The SUV lurched forward, tires skidding in the dirt. We shot out of the clearing and down the forest path, the branches whipping against the sides of the car. I looked back once. The two men had jumped into one of their vehicles and were following. My roommate drove like her life depended on it, because it did. She took every turn too fast, bouncing us in our seats, but it kept us ahead. After what felt like an eternity, we burst onto a main road. She kept driving without stopping, weaving through back roads until we reached a small town about 10 miles away. Only then did we stop. We sat in the car, trembling, too shocked to speak. Eventually, we found our way back to campus. We reported what we had seen to the campus police, who contacted the county sheriff. Officers searched the clearing, but by the time they arrived, there was nothing left. No cars, no men, only blackened patches in the grass where the fires had burned. We never learned who those men were, or what exactly we had witnessed, but we both knew we had come terrifyingly close to something far worse than fear. We had seen something we were not meant to see, and we had survived only because we ran fast enough. It was supposed to be just another late-night drive. I had done it dozens of times before. The long stretches of highway through Maine, the endless pine trees rushing past in the dark. My music turned up to keep me awake. I had stocked up for the trip the way I always did. A giant soda, some snacks, and a few American Spirit cigarettes tucked into my glove box. The air was cool, the road was quiet, and for a while it felt like nothing could go wrong. Somewhere between cities, I decided to stop at a Taco Bell drive-thru. I ordered too much food, as usual. By the time I finished eating, my stomach was in knots. Not just uncomfortable, urgent. I knew I had pushed my luck with all the greasy food and caffeine. I needed a bathroom, and fast. I spotted a rest stop 2 miles ahead and pulled off the highway. It was almost 1:30 in the morning. The parking lot was nearly empty. Only one other vehicle sat there, its windows fogged over. I figured it was someone napping between long stretches of driving. Nothing unusual. I grabbed my smokes and an old magazine from the car before heading inside. The restroom was cold and smelled faintly of disinfectant. I found a stall, shut the door, and prepared for what was going to be a long, uncomfortable stay. Minutes passed. I tried to distract myself with the magazine, but it was hard to focus. The quiet stretched on. The occasional groan of pipes was the only sound. I had just lit a cigarette when I heard the door open. Heavy footsteps entered. Slow, deliberate. They stopped directly in front of my stall. I froze. The person did not speak. I could hear them breathing deeply, almost exaggerated, like they wanted me to know they were there. I tried to clear my throat, thinking maybe it was someone waiting for a stall, but they did not move. Finally, I said something, trying to sound casual. I told them to hang on a minute. But they stayed where they were. That was when I noticed the shoes. They were massive, at least size 17. Filthy, scuffed, the kind of footwear that looked like they belonged to someone who had not cared about appearances in a long time. I stared at them, my heart beating faster with every second. Something was wrong. The quiet was shattered by a sudden pounding. The person slammed both hands against the stall door, making it rattle in its frame. The metal latch held, but it shook under the force. Then they grabbed the top of the door and pulled, testing its strength. I shouted at them to back off. The pounding stopped. For a few seconds, all I could hear was my own breathing and the faint squeak of shoes shifting against the tile floor. Then the footsteps retreated. The restroom door creaked open and slammed shut. I waited. I told myself it was over, that maybe it had been a drunk or someone on drugs, not thinking clearly. But when I finally stood up, pulled myself together and opened the stall door, something caught my eye. Words were written in black marker across the restroom mirror. "See you outside." And underneath, a single name, Nitro. My stomach dropped. I knew of that name. Everyone in Maine seemed to, or at least everyone who had spent enough time on the back roads and in the rural bars. Nitro was not a specific man, but a nickname used by several different men over the years. None of them were people you wanted to meet in a dark place. I stepped out cautiously. The restroom was empty. The parking lot beyond the windows looked quiet, though the fogged-up vehicle still sat in the same spot. I knew I had only one option. I sprinted for my car. I did not look back. My instincts screamed at me not to. I flung myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it. The key was already in the ignition. I started the car and threw it into reverse, spinning the tires as I backed out. In the rearview mirror, I finally allowed myself a glance. A huge figure stood between the restroom building and the fogged-up car. He wore a dark hat, which he tore off and threw to the ground. His arms flailed in rage as he stomped toward me, but he was too late. I hit the gas and sped down the entrance ramp, back onto the highway. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I kept glancing at the mirror, expecting headlights to appear behind me. They never did. I drove well past the next 3 exits before finally pulling into a busy gas station. I sat there for a long time, engine idling, trying to calm down. I never told the police. I was not sure what to report. A man had threatened me, but he had not technically committed a crime, and Nitro was a ghost name, no last name, no address. Just a warning passed between travelers. Do not stop where Nitro might be. That was the last time I ever used a highway rest stop after midnight. And to this day, I cannot use a public restroom without checking every stall, every shadow, every reflection. Because Nitro might still be waiting, and he does not forget faces. It started simply enough. I had just started university and made an effort to meet people. The campus felt overwhelming at first, but I soon found a rhythm. I had a few casual friends, a new girlfriend, and a daily routine that kept me busy and distracted from the usual anxieties of being on my own for the first time. One of my classes always ended just before lunch, and it became a habit for students to grab food together afterward. I was not picky about who I joined. One day, a girl named Lily asked if I wanted to eat with her. She seemed quiet, a little awkward, but friendly enough. I agreed. That first lunch was unremarkable. We talked about the class and campus life. When she asked if we could eat together the following week, I said sure, and so it became a routine. I told myself it was good to be social. After a few weeks, though, I noticed how she would always make sure I had no other lunch plans. She started waiting for me outside class. It was subtle at first, easy to dismiss. But soon I realized that I had stopped eating lunch with anyone else. It seemed harmless. She did not do anything inappropriate. She was just always there. One day I added a classmate on social media. As soon as Lily overheard my last name, she sent me a friend request. We had no mutual friends. I realized she must have searched through university directories or social media pages to find me. Her messages started shortly after. They were friendly at first. Small comments about our lunches, the class, general college things, but soon they became more personal. She messaged me throughout the day, often commenting on things I posted online almost the instant I posted them. She was paying close attention. When she learned my girlfriend's name was also Lily, her mood shifted. She joked that my girlfriend should pick a new name. She called it confusing, even though it was a common enough name. She mentioned how much better our lunches were compared to the time I spent with my girlfriend. I started to see signs that she was developing feelings for me. She never said it outright, but the hints were clear. I didn't know how to confront her. I figured it would pass or that I could distance myself slowly. I was wrong. The final day of our shared class, she asked me to go for a walk. She led me to a patch of woods at the edge of campus. I followed, not wanting to be rude. We sat on a log, and she talked about how much she would miss our time together over the summer. She seemed almost tearful. Before I could excuse myself, she leaned in and kissed me. I pulled away quickly, trying to stay calm. I told her I needed to get going and left. I thought that would be the end of it. After summer break, I returned to school. My friend group had shifted. Some old friendships had fallen apart. I had broken up with my girlfriend and started seeing a guy. It was a rough time, and I felt isolated. Lily was still there, still friendly, still messaging. For a while, I let it continue. She seemed harmless compared to the other chaos in my life. Then something strange happened. I was scrolling through a blog site where I posted thoughts and reblogged photos. I came across a post where someone had copied a line from my profile and asked strangers to analyze what kind of person might write it. My stomach dropped. The question had not been anonymous. It was linked to an account. I clicked through to the blog. It was pink and red, filled with hearts and quotes about love and friendship. At first glance, it seemed like any young woman's personal blog, but the posts were all about me. There were dozens of entries recounting things I had done or said, some dating back over a year. She wrote about our lunches as if they were romantic dates. She mentioned the kiss as though it had been mutual, describing it in detail that made my skin crawl. She posted about how my new boyfriend did not deserve me. She speculated about how long we would last before I finally realized I belonged with her. There was a recurring mention of someone named Steven, her best friend. She talked about him constantly, how he understood her, supported her, how he thought she and I were perfect for each other. But as I read further, I realized Steven was not real. Steven was a version of me. She quoted things I had said to her and attributed them to this imaginary friend. She had split me into two people in her mind, the best friend who always cared for her and the soulmate who would one day be with her. There were even photos taken from my social media, reposted with captions about how I looked when I was happiest, when I was around her. The more I read, the sicker I felt. I confronted her online. I told her I knew about the blog. She acted as if I had not said anything. She changed the subject, chatting casually like nothing had happened. The next day, the blog was gone, but it did not stop. She began trying to seduce my boyfriend. When that failed, she flirted with 3 of my friends. She dated one of my old housemates just long enough to get closer to me, then sent me messages claiming she was only with him because she could not have me. When I tried to distance myself, she started spreading rumors about me. She even interfered with a major opportunity I had been working toward, though I could never prove how. Eventually, I realized the safest option was to let her think she still had a place in my life, while ignoring her as much as possible. During my final year, I received a late-night message from her. She asked how long I had known I was queer. I answered politely, hoping that would be the end of it. It was not. She began telling me how she wished she was a boy so that I would love her. She sent long, detailed fantasies about the life we could have together. She included things I had told her in confidence, twisting them into her imagined history. Then came the photos. She dressed in clothes like mine, posed like I had in my pictures. She messaged me, repeating my own stories back to me, pretending they were hers. She had absorbed my identity into hers. I blocked her on every platform. She found ways around it. She kept contacting me from different accounts. The last time she tried to reach out was through a friend request on a new platform. I ignored it. 12 years have passed since we met, and still, she has not let me go. She built a fantasy life around me, and in her mind we are still connected. But in reality, she will never see me again. I was 7 or 8 the spring it happened. My mom, my aunt, and my grandmother were deep into their annual spring cleaning at my grandparents' old house. It was a quiet property near the outskirts of a rural town, surrounded by fields and woods with no close neighbors. That house always had a stillness about it. As a child, I thought it was peaceful. Looking back, that stillness feels different now. My two cousins and I were upstairs, playing and laughing, taking a break from the grown-ups, scrubbing and sorting downstairs. We had been told to stay out of the way while they worked. The upstairs was ours for the afternoon. At one point, my aunt called up to us from the kitchen. She asked if we had been in her purse. She said some money was missing, about $20. None of us had touched it. She seemed skeptical but asked if we would check her car, just in case the bill had fallen out. I volunteered along with one cousin. We went out into the bright afternoon sun, checked the car's floor and seats. Nothing. As we closed the doors, my cousin accidentally slammed hers a bit too hard. She asked me not to mention it. Her mom hated slammed doors. I agreed, and we headed back inside. That should have been the end of it. A simple misunderstanding over a misplaced bill. Minutes later, my mom glanced out the window. She frowned and told us we had left one of the car doors open. We swore we had closed them, even admitting to the door being slammed. My mom went out to close it, muttering about us not paying attention. She was gone longer than she should have been. When she came back inside, her face was pale. She told my grandmother quietly that she had felt like someone was watching her when she went out. She thought she saw a shadow move inside the van. As they spoke, the phone rang. My grandmother answered. I watched the color drain from her face. She hung up quickly and told my mother to get back inside and lock the doors. We all gathered upstairs. My grandmother called the police. My mom said she had not seen anyone clearly, but the feeling of being watched had been so strong she could not shake it. She also thought the sliding van door had been slightly open when she got there, though she could not remember leaving it that way. As we waited for the police, the house fell into a heavy silence. We huddled together in the upstairs bedroom. Even the cousins stopped playing. None of us felt safe. Then we noticed smoke. It was faint at first, drifting past the upstairs window. My grandmother spotted it. She shouted for my mom to check the stove. Maybe something had been left on. Maybe something was burning inside. My mom ran downstairs, but nothing was cooking. No pots, no pans. The kitchen was cold. She opened the back door. The smoke smell hit her immediately. She called out for us to stay upstairs and went to investigate. The police arrived moments later. 2 officers. My mom led them to where she thought the smoke was coming from. Behind the house near the tree line, the grass had been burned in a small patch, as if someone had started a fire, but stomped it out quickly. The police searched the property and the nearby woods, but found no one. They checked the van. There were smudges on the back windows, handprints that none of us had left. The officer said the phone call my grandmother had answered before had come from our own number. Someone inside the house or using the house phone had called and whispered, "I know you're in there," before hanging up. But none of us had made that call. The mobile bag phone inside the van was missing. The police took our statements, walked the property twice, and told us to stay inside for the rest of the day. They promised to keep patrols nearby. They never found anyone. The money missing from my aunt's purse was never recovered. A small thing, but it had set everything in motion. Without that $20 bill going missing, we never would have checked the car. We never would have noticed the door. I have thought about that day many times over the years. I wonder if someone had been watching the house longer than we knew, waiting, testing, seeing how close they could get without being noticed. When I was a child, I thought the house's stillness made it safe. Now as an adult, I know better. Sometimes stillness is not safety. Sometimes it means someone is already there, waiting. I have a few stories of my own, but this one belongs to my stepmom and her childhood friend. She told it to my sister and me when we were growing up, mostly to scare us into staying cautious around strangers. It was her version of stranger danger, and it worked. My stepmom, we'll call her Macy, grew up as a privileged teen in the late 70s. Her mother had moved the family from England to the US when Macy was 9. She went to a good high school, ran with the popular crowd, but she never really fit in with the perfect, polished kids. Instead, she became best friends with a girl named Lily. Lily was the outdoorsy, adventurous type. While Macy was all manicures and shopping malls, Lily was hiking boots and camping trips. Still, they bonded like sisters. Lily introduced Macy to all the things her other friends thought were boring or gross: hiking, fishing, sailing. Over time, Macy grew to love those trips into nature, even though she'd complain about dirt and blisters the whole time. One Sunday in late spring, they decided to hike some hills about an hour from town. Macy put on what she claimed were very expensive hiking shoes, and they headed out in Lily's old beat-up station wagon. When they arrived at the trailhead, they noticed the parking lot was empty. No other cars, no other hikers. Just the two of them and the endless, silent hills. That would be important later. They set out on the trail, but soon veered off it because, as Macy put it, Lily fancied herself a bit of a badass. They climbed until they reached the summit, where the view stretched for miles. Macy started grumbling almost immediately. Her polished side was emerging again, and she wanted to head back. Lily agreed, and they began their descent, Macy groaning every few minutes about sore feet or sunburn. After 10 minutes, Macy insisted they leave the rough trail and walk down the paved road instead. Lily rolled her eyes but didn't argue. They probably looked ridiculous in full hiking gear, walking along a dusty back road like lost tourists. They had only been walking for 5 minutes when a truck pulled up alongside them. It was a red pickup, rusty and loud, the kind of vehicle you'd expect to see abandoned in a junkyard. The passenger side window rolled down, and the driver leaned over to greet them. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with long, unkempt brown hair spilling out from beneath a baseball cap. His beard was thick, and his smile was friendly, almost too friendly. He asked if they needed a ride. Macy told us later he was handsome, charming even. Lily, however, said something felt wrong the moment he spoke. She described it as an instinct, like her nerves were warning her before her brain had time to catch up. But Macy wasn't convinced. She thought it was silly to turn down help, especially when her feet were killing her and it was just a quick ride down the hill. Against her better judgment, Lily agreed. The man reached over and opened the passenger door, gesturing for them to climb in. He directed them to slide behind the seat into the back because the front passenger area was filled with junk. Macy didn't even blink. She crawled into the back and motioned for Lily to follow. The truck smelled like gasoline and mildew. As they settled into the back seat, Lily noticed a few things that made her uneasy. Behind the driver's seat was a coil of rope. A box of plastic wrap was half hidden under the front passenger seat. Not one box, but several, as if he had bought them in bulk. Lily kept her observations to herself. She didn't want to freak Macy out. They drove for what felt like longer than 10 minutes, yet the woods seemed just as dense. The road was rough, and they hadn't passed a single other vehicle. When Lily asked how much longer, the man replied he was taking a shorter route, but had to stop somewhere first. Neither of them liked that answer. Eventually, they turned down an even narrower road and arrived at a small cabin tucked deep into the forest. It looked like it had been built decades ago, its wood darkened by weather. An old tree stump sat out front, with a large axe embedded deep in its surface. Firewood was stacked beside it. Without another word, the man put the truck in park, stepped out, and told them to stay put while he grabbed something from inside. As soon as he disappeared into the cabin, Lily grabbed Macy's arm. "We need to get out of here," she whispered. Macy hesitated. She'd been raised to believe that running off would be rude, especially when someone was offering them help. But when Lily insisted, her fear finally sank in. They climbed out of the truck and crept around to the front, staying quiet. As they moved, Macy caught sight of something that turned her stomach cold. Under the driver's seat, just barely hidden, was a hatchet. It was stained dark brown. At first she tried to tell herself it was rust, but the stains stretched down into the floor mats. That was no rust. Panic broke whatever manners Macy had left. She and Lily sprinted into the trees, not stopping even when branches scraped their faces and brambles caught their clothes. They didn't know where they were going. They only knew they had to put distance between them and that truck. Eventually, they stumbled back onto a familiar trail, the same one they had started on earlier. They followed it until they saw the wooden fence that marked the parking lot. Relief washed over them, but it quickly curdled into fresh fear. The red truck was there. It was parked at the far end of the lot, facing away from them. They couldn't see inside. They didn't know if he was waiting. Macy wanted to bolt straight for Lily's car, but Lily grabbed her arm. "No, we watch. We wait." It was the 70s. No cell phones, no nearby ranger stations. Just the two of them and a predator who knew the area better than they did. They huddled behind a large tree, using the underbrush to stay hidden. Hours crawled by. The sky darkened. The sounds of night creatures filled the air, but Macy could barely hear them over the pounding of her own heart. Lily kept her eyes fixed on the truck, motionless. Then came the moment that haunted them for years. As twilight deepened, the back door of their car, the car they had left in the parking lot, swung open. The man climbed out. He paused, scanned the surrounding trees, and calmly shut the door. He walked back to his truck, got in, and slowly drove away. Only after the sound of the engine had faded into the distance did the girls dare to move. They sprinted for their car, jumped inside, and roared down the road, not even closing the doors properly before peeling out. When Macy told us this story years later, she confessed she had never been so terrified in her life. Lily, too, admitted that night changed her. Neither of them ever accepted rides from strangers again, no matter how polite or handsome they seemed. They never reported it to the police. In that era, it seemed pointless. They didn't even have the man's full name or license plate. He would be elderly by now, if he was still alive. But every time Macy told the story, she ended it the same way. "I don't care how tired or sore you are. If you ever feel something's wrong, you run. You run and you don't look back." And we always listened. When I was 14, I agreed to babysit my 3 younger cousins for the night. I had done it before, but this time was different. My aunt and uncle had moved to a remote house in a mountainous part of Pennsylvania. It was one of those places where the darkness felt thicker and the woods pressed in from every side. Their house was perched halfway up a steep hillside. The back deck dropped 15 feet onto rocks, which rolled down to a river. The nearest neighbors lived half a mile away, and the closest main road was a mile beyond that. Once night fell, there were no lights, no glow from street lamps or passing cars. If you didn't know exactly where to go, you'd never find it. That night, my aunt and uncle were going to a wedding over an hour away. They left me with pizza for dinner and a number to reach them at the reception. There was also the old landline, but this was the early 2000s. I didn't have a cell phone, and even if I had, there was no signal in those hills. When they left, the baby was already asleep upstairs. The 4-year-old, who had a little cold, curled up watching TV in the living room. My 8-year-old cousin Jake and I played Guitar Hero in the loft above. From there, we could glance down and check on the others. To our right was a massive window overlooking the driveway. That driveway had 2 parts. The left fork led to the open carport where everyone parked. The right fork dipped steeply down to a flat area, ending at a garage door and a side door with a window. That lower driveway was never used. It had become the kids' play area, full of bikes and toys. Even visitors knew not to park down there. By 10 o'clock, the baby and the 4-year-old were both asleep. Jake and I kept playing, not a care in the world. Outside, a storm had swept the moon from the sky. The only light came from the television and the faint glow from the stove clock downstairs. Then headlights. I noticed them out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was my aunt and uncle returning early, but the lights were too high. A truck. And instead of pulling into the carport, the vehicle crept down the steep driveway into the kids' play area. I froze. Jake saw it too. "Do you know whose truck that is?" I asked quietly. He shook his head. "No, never seen it before." The truck was enormous, with extra roof lights glaring like angry eyes. It didn't belong to anyone we knew. My chest tightened as dread rolled over me. Something was wrong. I grabbed Jake's arm and ushered him downstairs. I didn't want to wake the other kids unless absolutely necessary, but I wanted to be near them. I checked the landline and picked it up, ready to call 911 if I had to. Downstairs, I could hear the metallic rattle of the garage door being shaken, not knocked on, shaken violently like someone was trying to force it open. The side door's handle jiggled next, then stopped. I whispered to Jake to stay quiet. My hand trembled as I turned the lock on the door that led to the basement stairs. It was flimsy, but it was something. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I dialed 911. The operator answered in a calm, steady voice. I told her everything in a rush, about the unknown truck, the sounds at the doors, how remote the house was. She assured me officers were on the way, but warned it could take up to 30 minutes. I could barely breathe. Then came a soft tap. I turned around, my heart in my throat. A man was standing at the sliding glass door leading to the deck. He had long, tangled red hair and a bushy red beard. His face was almost pressed against the glass and he was grinning. Not a friendly grin, not even a fake, forced smile. It was a grin full of cruelty, predatory, delighted. I screamed before I could stop myself. Jake clung to my arm, whispering, "That's Mr. Jim." I blinked. "You know him?" Jake nodded hesitantly. "Dad knows him. He's been here before." That should have brought relief, but it didn't. Everything about that man screamed danger, and the way he was trying to break in, not knocking, not calling out, told me he had no good reason for being there. "I'm on the phone with the police," I yelled at the glass, though my voice shook. The man's grin faded into a scowl. He stepped back, staring into the shadows of the woods. A second figure, a taller, thinner man, stood just beyond him. I hadn't seen him until that moment. Both turned and vanished into the darkness. Minutes dragged by, my ears strained for every sound. The baby and 4-year-old slept on, unaware. Jake and I huddled close to the phone, the operator staying on the line, her calm voice guiding me through the fear. The truck's lights flickered through the trees. Then they reversed slowly up the driveway and back toward the road, disappearing into the night. I still didn't feel safe. The operator told me the police had contacted my aunt and uncle. They were racing home. I kept the kids close, locking every possible door and window. The 4-year-old stirred but didn't fully wake. The baby slept like an angel through the whole nightmare. After what felt like forever, flashing lights splashed against the windows. 2 officers arrived. They swept the property and found tire tracks leading away, but little else. No sign of the men. My aunt and uncle arrived not long after. My uncle's face darkened when Jake mentioned Mr. Jim. I didn't hear everything, but I caught enough. Mr. Jim wasn't a friend. He was an old acquaintance of my uncle's from before he'd cleaned up his act, someone connected to his past drug problems. My uncle muttered something about handling it himself. My aunt was furious, at Jim, at my uncle, at the whole situation. They promised me I'd never have to babysit there again, and I never did. Years later, long after my uncle had gotten clean and my cousins had grown up, I still thought about that night. The police had no way to prove what Mr. Jim and his friend had planned, but deep down, I knew. That grin had told me everything. They weren't just coming by to say hello. Back when I was in college, I took a part-time job helping this eccentric guy assemble prototype machines for a company he worked with. It paid decently, and the hours were flexible. Most of the time, it was quiet work. Just me, the owner, a couple of his family members, the accountant, and the machines. The workshop was in a tiny, almost forgotten town that had been a booming mining hub back in the 1890s. Now it was more or less dead, nothing but decaying brick buildings and cracked pavement. The building we worked in was a leftover from that mining boom, over a century old. 3 stories tall, drafty, creaky. The bottom floor was an empty warehouse, the middle was a hollowed-out old ballroom or something, and the top floor was where the workshop sat under a high-arched ceiling. Huge wooden beams crossed the space overhead, worn smooth by time. There was also a basement, but it had been sealed off years ago. The only entrance was from the warehouse next door, which no one used anymore. Most days I worked when everyone else did. But one week, I fell behind because of finals. To catch up, I asked the boss if I could stay late. He said sure, just to make sure I locked up when I left. That night, everyone packed up around 5 in the afternoon. I stayed behind. By 6, the sun had gone down and shadows had swallowed the old town. I double-checked the front door at the bottom of the stairs, locked. Then I went back to the workshop and started assembling a batch of machine parts. 2 hours passed quietly. My hands worked while my mind wandered. That's when I heard the footsteps, slow, heavy, climbing the old staircase that led up to the 3rd floor. At first, I assumed it was the boss coming back for something, maybe a tool or a book from the shelves in the side room. I waited, expecting to hear him call out or walk past me into the main room. But the footsteps stopped just outside the room, and no one appeared. I waited a moment longer, feeling the air grow colder around me. Finally, I got up and walked over to the door. The side room was empty. The hallway was empty. Even the big room beyond was empty. I searched the entire top floor. No one. Frowning, I went down to the locked front door, still shut tight. The street outside was deserted. The whole block looked like a ghost town, literally. I returned upstairs, telling myself it must have been the old stairs shifting, or maybe someone walking around in one of the connected buildings. Sound traveled strangely in these old places. That was the logical explanation. That had to be it. I got back to work. Another half hour passed. Then I heard the footsteps again. This time they crossed the floor above me, or rather they seemed to come from the beams overhead, where no one could possibly walk. It sounded like boots pacing back and forth. I froze, every hair standing on end. I told myself I was imagining things. Final stress. Lack of sleep. But when I glanced at the shelves against the far wall, I noticed something odd. One of the engineering books had fallen to the floor. It hadn't been there earlier. I was sure of it. Still, I wasn't ready to give in to fear. I kept working until a little after 7:30. Then I packed up, clocked out, and went downstairs. That's when things took a turn. As I reached the front door, I saw it was wide open. Not cracked, not ajar, wide open. The lock I double-checked was still twisted into the locked position, but the door itself stood open to the night. A cold wind swirled in, rustling papers on the nearby desk. I stood there for a long minute, heart racing. No lights burned in any of the other buildings. The street was silent, not a soul in sight. I told myself someone else in the building must have opened it. A construction crew. Maybe someone working in another part of the old complex. But when I stepped outside and looked up and down the block, the truth became obvious. The entire area was deserted. I walked around the entire block, shining my flashlight into empty windows and alleyways. Nothing. No people. No signs of activity. I returned to the front door and cautiously stepped inside. I shut it, relocked it, and started to back away. That's when I heard it again, the staircase creaking under weight. Slow, deliberate. I didn't wait to see who or what was coming. I bolted out the door, slammed it behind me, and ran to my car. I peeled out, tires squealing on the cracked pavement. As I drove away, I glanced back over my shoulder. The front door stood wide open again. I didn't sleep that night. When I returned to work the next day, I debated whether to tell anyone what had happened. Finally, I pulled aside the boss's son. He was in his 20s, easygoing. I figured he might be more understanding than his gruff father. I told him I'd heard noises, footsteps, doors moving. I didn't mention the open front door. I didn't want him to think I was making excuses for not finishing my work. His reaction chilled me. He nodded slowly and said, "Yeah, I hear stuff too. That's why I don't work nights anymore." I pressed him for details. He admitted he'd seen shadows moving in the corners of rooms, heard voices. Once he even felt something cold touch his back. He told me not to work late anymore. He'd tell his dad to keep me on daytime hours. His father wasn't pleased. He called his son superstitious and told me to cut the nonsense. After that, he treated me with less respect, as if I'd insulted him by bringing it up. Between the strange occurrences and the boss's attitude, I started looking for a new job. Within a few weeks, I found one and gave notice. I thought that would be the end of it. Years later, I saw the old boss's name in the newspaper. His business had gone bankrupt and he was being evicted from the building. But when the police arrived to remove him, they found him dead. He had hanged himself from the central beam on the top floor, the same beam that loomed over my old workspace. The paper said the death was suspicious at first. There was no stool, no ladder beneath him, nothing he could have stood on to secure the noose. Eventually, investigators concluded he must have climbed the shelves along the wall and somehow worked his way onto the beam. No one knows for sure. The family moved to Florida soon after. I never heard from them again. But sometimes, when I think back to that building, I remember the feeling I had that night. The cold weight of unseen eyes watching me from the shadows above. And I wonder if something old, something restless, had claimed one more victim. When I was in high school, my friends and I had this reckless hobby. We'd research murders and tragedies that happened out in our rural area. When I first moved into my apartment, I loved it. It was nothing special, just a cheap one-bedroom in an aging building on the outskirts of the city. But it was mine. The rent was low because the building was older and a little rough around the edges. I didn't mind. I was a college student trying to save money, and this was the best deal I could find. The apartment was small but cozy. Pale yellow walls, scratched hardwood floors, and a window that overlooked the alley behind the building. The kitchen cabinets stuck when I opened them, and the refrigerator hummed loudly at night. But these were minor inconveniences. I liked the independence. The first month passed without incident. I decorated a little, bought some second-hand furniture, and settled into a routine. School during the day, work in the evening, home by night. Everything felt normal. Then I started noticing the noises. At first, they were subtle. A faint scraping sound, almost like the shifting of metal. I assumed it was the building settling or perhaps the ventilation system, which was old and noisy. The sounds always came at night, usually around midnight or later. They weren't loud, just enough to catch my attention when everything else was quiet. I mentioned it casually to the building manager when I paid my rent. He shrugged and said the ducts were ancient and prone to making strange sounds. He assured me it was nothing. I tried to believe him, but the noises became more distinct. What once sounded like scraping metal soon resembled soft, deliberate shuffling, like someone crawling through the vents. I told myself it was ridiculous. The air ducts couldn't possibly support the weight of a person. It had to be raccoons or some other animal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the sounds were purposeful. They started and stopped at odd times, always when the building was quiet, as if timed to avoid detection. One night, while working on a late assignment, I paused to listen. The shuffling was above me, moving slowly from the living room toward the bedroom. My skin prickled. I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding. Then the sound stopped. Complete silence. I waited, breath held, but nothing more came. I told myself it was in my head and went to bed. The next morning, I noticed something strange. The small vent cover near the floor in the living room was askew. Just slightly. I had never touched it. I kneeled down and tried to push it back into place, but the screws were loose and the metal felt oddly bent. I tightened the screws as best I could and tried to forget about it. That night, the noises returned, but now they were accompanied by something worse, a faint breathing sound. Slow, deliberate inhales and exhales, not animalistic, human. I lay in bed, frozen beneath the covers, listening to the breathing grow louder. It seemed to come from inside the wall, from the vent near the floor. My rational mind fought against what I was hearing. It couldn't be possible, yet there it was. I stayed awake until dawn, heart racing, muscles tense. The moment the sun rose, I dressed and went straight to the building manager. I demanded he inspect the vents. He looked annoyed but agreed, probably just to shut me up. He removed the vent cover and shined a flashlight inside. The duct was coated in dust, with faint streaks where something or someone had disturbed it. He poked around with a metal rod but found nothing. He assured me it was rats or raccoons and promised to call pest control. That afternoon, he installed new vent covers with secure screws. I felt some relief, though unease lingered beneath the surface. For a few nights, the apartment was silent. I began to relax, thinking it had been animals all along. Then, the fourth night, I woke suddenly in the early hours, not from a noise, but from the oppressive feeling of being watched. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I scanned the room. That was when I noticed the vent cover at the foot of my bed. The new one. It was missing. In its place was a dark, open hole. The breathing returned. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was stare into the black void of the duct. A pale hand slowly emerged from the opening, fingers thin and filthy, nails cracked and sharp. I don't remember how I gathered the strength to move, but I bolted from the bed and ran out the door, leaving everything behind. I pounded on the manager's door until he answered, groggy and confused. When he and two other tenants returned with me, the vent cover was back in place. No sign of forced entry, no footprints, nothing. The police were called. They inspected the apartment but found no intruders. Pest control later confirmed there were no signs of animals in the ductwork. But the scratches inside the vent, deep, human-sized scratches, could not be explained. I moved out the next day. That was over 2 years ago. Sometimes when I lie awake at night in my new apartment, I can still hear that deliberate breathing in the quiet hours before dawn. I never found out who or what had been hiding in the vents, county, then drive out at night to find the scenes. We would film our explorations, drink terrible beer, and scare each other for the thrill of it. Eventually, we ran out of notorious locations. That's when we started hunting down abandoned farmsteads. We learned how to spot them: rutted dirt roads, unnatural groves of trees, old mailbox posts, long stripped of names. We'd cruise the back roads at night until we found a promising spot, then investigate. One cool, moonless night, we were out driving when someone spotted a stand of trees far off in a field. It wasn't in line with any of the current property fences. That usually meant an old homestead. We bounced across the field, headlights slicing through the tall grass until the house came into view. It wasn't completely decrepit. The roof sagged but held. The paint had long since peeled away, and tall weeds swallowed the front steps. The doors had been padlocked from the outside, but they had rusted to uselessness. We knocked them off easily. 6 of us entered, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The first thing we noticed was how untouched it seemed. Most abandoned places were gutted by time or vandalized. This one wasn't. The dining table stood perfectly set for 4. Plates, glasses, silverware. not a speck out of place. The layer of dust was thin, almost as if the family had left recently, not decades ago. The refrigerator still held the rotting remains of food. The cupboards bulged with canned goods. Someone found a stack of mail on the counter, the top letter postmarked June 1978. Another found a TV guide in the living room, a yellowed issue featuring UFOs on the cover. Family photos still hung on the walls. Mom, dad, son, daughter, all dressed in clothes that screamed late 70s. Their faces smiled down at us, frozen in time. The furniture was dusty but undisturbed. Closets held neat rows of clothing. Coats still hung by the door. We had never seen anything like it. Most places were cleared out when people moved or, at the very least, looted by previous explorers. "This wasn't moving out," one of my friends whispered. "They just left." We decided to split up to explore the upstairs bedrooms, 3 pairs for the 3 rooms. My friend Nate and I took the room closest to the stairs. It looked like a boy's room. Posters, toys, a dusty baseball glove on the dresser. Nothing too strange. We started looking through the closet when a scream shattered the quiet. 2 of our friends were yelling from the far bedroom. We bolted into the hallway. "What? What's wrong?" someone shouted. They couldn't answer at first, just gasping for breath. Finally, one managed to say, "Just come see." The room had been a girl's bedroom. Pink wallpaper, flowered bedspread, and in the center of the bed lay a porcelain doll. It wasn't the doll itself that sent shivers crawling up my spine. It was the way it was positioned. Propped upright against the pillows, blanket drawn up to its waist, arms resting on top. Its head was turned ever so slightly, the black glass eyes staring directly at the door, as if waiting for someone to walk in. But what unnerved us most was the fact that the dust on the blanket was disturbed. The doll hadn't been there long. "I don't like this," Nate muttered. The rest of us agreed. Quickly, we made a hasty retreat down the stairs and out into the night. Once outside, someone pointed out something else. Think about it. They left everything, food, clothes, dishes, but someone took the time to set up that doll. That hit us like a punch in the gut. Someone had placed that doll carefully recently and intentionally. We didn't stick around to speculate. We drove off into the night, headlights bouncing across the field until the road swallowed us. Later, we tried researching the family. The names on the mail didn't turn up any records of accidents or deaths. No murders, no disappearances. They had just ceased to exist. The county records showed the land had been seized for unpaid taxes. No one had tried to claim it or repurchase it. As far as we knew, no one had ever gone back, not even us. But sometimes in my dreams, I still see that doll, waiting. In my early 20s, I traveled with a small singing group. There were 8 of us, and we rotated team members every year. One summer, we were invited to stay overnight at the home of a former team member named Drew. He wasn't there, but his mom, sister, and younger brother welcomed us warmly. I knew that Drew's dad had passed away 4 years earlier from a heart attack. He hadn't died in the house, though, so I told myself the heavy feeling I got stepping inside was just leftover awkwardness. Drew and I had never been close, and I felt a little guilty for avoiding him back then. Maybe that explained why my skin prickled as I walked through the door. Sleeping space was tight, so I was given a cot in the basement along with another girl from the team. The basement wasn't creepy in the traditional sense. It had been refinished, clean and dry. There was soft carpet and a few chairs. A small digital clock sat on the floor between my cot and the wall, the red numbers casting a faint glow. I settled in for the night, facing the wall with my back to the room. That's how I always slept. I liked being cocooned from the world, especially in unfamiliar places. At 2:48 a.m., I woke up, instantly. No grogginess, no drifting back to sleep, just full, bone-deep awareness. My eyes flew open, staring at the red glow of the clock. My heart pounded so hard it made my throat tighten. I couldn't swallow. I tried to turn over, but my muscles refused to cooperate. Panic seized me. The pressure in the room was suffocating. Not like the weight of air or blankets. This was psychological, primal. Like something was right behind me, looming over the cot. I didn't dare turn around. My instinct screamed at me to stay still, to pretend I was asleep, to not look. That's when the vision started. Flashes of violence. Blood. Faces frozen in expressions of agony. I saw glimpses of things I couldn't fully describe, things no sane mind should witness. Then came the laughter. It wasn't one person. It was a chorus. Thousands of voices, high and low, men and women all laughing. Not joyful laughter, but mockery, cruelty, derision. The sound filled my ears, louder than any dream or nightmare I'd ever had. I wanted to cover my ears, but I couldn't move. A horrible thought intruded into my mind. Suicide. Not in a passing, theoretical way. I felt like dying would be a relief, an escape from whatever was crowding into my mind. That was the worst part. I wasn't suicidal. I never had been. Just as suddenly as it had begun, the terror ebbed away. The laughter faded into an ominous silence. And in my mind, clear as day, I heard a voice, not laughing, but whispering. Not this one. The clock read 2:57 a.m. 9 minutes had passed. It felt like hours. I lay there paralyzed by fear until dawn began to break and the birds outside stirred. I sat up slowly, testing my limbs. Everything felt weak, but I could move again. I didn't say a word to anyone. I just gathered my things and waited by the van until the rest of my team was ready to leave. As we packed up, Drew's younger brother approached me. He looked pale, his eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. Without prompting, he said, "I'm sorry I couldn't help you this morning." His voice shook. His eyes were wet, as if he'd been crying. I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, but he turned and walked away before I could speak. 2 weeks later, we got word that Drew's brother had died by suicide, just before 3 in the morning. For months after that night, I had dreams filled with the same laughter, the same mocking voices. They'd wake me in the middle of the night, heart pounding, skin cold with sweat. I often wonder if Drew's brother had faced what I faced, only worse. Maybe whatever haunted that house had chosen him. Maybe when it came for me, it found me too strong or too unwilling. Or maybe it was simply waiting for another chance. I never went back to that town. I never saw that family again. And to this day, I don't speak about what happened to anyone except my husband. Writing it down now still sends chills crawling down my spine. Sometimes in the silence of night, I can almost hear the faint echoes of that laughter returning. Not this one. But what about the next? I had been living in downtown Memphis in what I thought was a relatively safe apartment. I worked as a pharmacy technician, and my days had fallen into a predictable, almost comforting routine. I would get home around 4:30 in the afternoon, change into comfortable clothes, and take care of small chores while waiting for my husband to return from work. It was simple, and I liked it that way. That day was no different. I came in, shut the heavy front door, and dropped my keys, wallet, and phone on the kitchen island. I moved through the apartment, starting a load of laundry, then wandered into the walk-in closet to hang up a few things. I was thinking about dinner, about errands, about anything other than danger. In fact, I had never even developed the habit of locking the front door when I got home during daylight hours. It seemed unnecessary, especially when my husband would be home soon anyway. As I was hanging the last shirt, I heard the door open. I smiled without thinking. My husband must have gotten off work early. Without turning, I called out, "I'm in here, love." Silence answered me. That was the first moment when something felt wrong. I stepped out of the closet and moved toward the living area. Standing on the other side of the kitchen island, near the front door, was a man I had never seen before. He was older than me, maybe in his 50s. No mask, no weapon, no attempt to hide himself. He just stood there, staring at me, His expression was calm, focused, calculating. For a split second, I thought he had entered the wrong apartment by mistake. But then he calmly reached down, picked up my wallet, my keys, and my phone, and slipped them into his own pockets as if he were pocketing loose change. My stomach turned cold. This wasn't a confused neighbor. This man was dangerous. I forced myself to stand tall. My voice came out surprisingly clear as I told him he needed to get out. That he had no business being here. He ignored me completely, eyes never leaving my face. My mind raced. The only device I had left to call for help was my laptop, sitting near the couch. It was closer to him than to me, but I had to try. I darted toward it, grabbed it, and sprinted for the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. I twisted the lock and shoved the small clothes hamper under the knob for extra security. My hands shook as I opened the laptop and logged into Facebook Messenger. I sent frantic messages to my husband, begging him to call the police. Minutes passed like hours. My husband messaged back almost immediately. He had already called 911 and was rushing home. I told him I had locked myself in the closet, hiding behind the second locked door inside the bathroom. The man tried the bathroom door. The knob jiggled. Then he began to hit it, slow and steady. I could hear his breathing on the other side. I couldn't bring myself to scream, couldn't bring myself to shout for help. I was frozen, trapped in a body that refused to act. My mind kept telling me that this was how I would die. Then, as if to mock me, the closet doorknob twisted too. The sound of frustrated muttering filtered through the wood. I felt utterly helpless, the door held by some miracle. Footsteps moved away. I heard drawers opening, cabinet doors slamming, the refrigerator. The man was ransacking my home. I could hear glass breaking, papers being torn. My husband arrived while the man was still inside. When he unlocked the front door, he found the man going through the contents of the kitchen. The intruder tried to run, but my husband tackled him to the floor. The man didn't fight back. He mumbled, disjointed words spilling from his mouth, but none of them made sense. The police arrived after what felt like forever. Later, we found out that it had taken them 25 minutes from the time my husband called 911 until they arrived at our door. The officers recovered my belongings from the man's pockets. They asked for a statement. One of them mentioned that I really should keep my doors locked, even during the day. His words stung, but deep down I knew he was right. The man was arrested, but what disturbed me most was how calm he had been through the entire ordeal. No anger, no panic, just cold, silent determination. Afterward, I couldn't sleep. Nights were the worst. I kept thinking about how easily he had walked into my home, how I had frozen when I should have fought. I was consumed with guilt and shame. I started locking my doors religiously, but fear still kept me awake. Eventually, I realized that locking the door wasn't enough. I needed to change myself. I enrolled in a self-defense program at a local martial arts school. At first, I was timid, hiding in the back of the room, afraid of my own shadow, but my instructor was patient. He taught me how to hold my ground, how to use my body to fight back, how to reclaim my confidence. Over time, I grew stronger. The woman who froze in that closet waiting to die slowly disappeared. Now, years later, I keep my doors locked. But more importantly, I know that if anyone ever tries to hurt me again, they'll face someone who can fight back. The fear never completely leaves, but neither does the strength I've gained. And that man, the one who thought he could take my safety, my peace, and my life, he didn't win. He never will. I was 22, living on my own for the first time. Every Sunday I would visit my family, do my laundry, and stay for dinner. It became a comforting routine, a way to stay connected even though I had moved about an hour away. That summer evening, rain had been falling steadily all day. By the time I finally said my goodbyes and packed up my car, it was nearly 10 p.m. My cousins had dropped by unexpectedly, so I stayed later than usual. The rain was relentless, pouring sheets of water over the windshield as I drove down the service road that led out of town. The road narrowed to a single lane where it crossed a train loading station. I always hated that spot, especially in the rain. The gravel lot beside it was always shadowy and felt isolated. Up ahead, through the downpour, I spotted the orange lights of a large truck idling in the quarry's parking lot. The rain distorted the view, and the truck seemed to appear out of nowhere. As I got closer, the driver suddenly pulled out without warning, cutting directly in front of me. I slammed on the brakes, tires skidding wildly over the wet pavement. I regained control, heart racing, and followed behind the truck as it slowly crossed the tracks and began climbing the steep hill beyond. The road widened into 2 lanes, but the truck drove directly in the center, blocking both. I kept my distance, not wanting to risk another close call. When the road leveled out, the truck finally shifted into the right lane. I sighed with relief and moved to pass him. But as soon as I pulled alongside, he swerved behind me aggressively. His high beams snapped on, flooding my rearview mirror with blinding light. I checked my headlights, thinking maybe he was signaling that they were off, but they were on. Confused, I changed lanes to let him pass. Instead, he followed my lane change, honking his horn in 3 sharp blasts. I tried to stay calm. Maybe he thought I had cut him off earlier. Maybe he was just an angry driver. I moved back into the right lane. He followed again. High beams. Honking. Now tailgating so close that I could barely see his grille. The rain made speeding dangerous. I had already nearly skidded once. The service road had terrible drainage, and hidden puddles could easily send a car spinning. I kept my speed steady, my pulse racing with each second he remained behind me. As we neared the highway ramp, I floored it. The incline slowed him down just enough for me to pull away. I glanced in the mirror and watched his headlights shrink in the distance. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. 10 miles down the highway, the same truck reappeared behind me. He must have taken the ramp right after me. His high beams cut through the darkness, locking onto my rear window. Panic surged through me. This wasn't a random road rage incident anymore. This man was following me. I thought about pulling off at the next exit, but I knew that after the exit, there would be nothing but woods for 30 miles. No houses, no businesses, no streetlights, just forest. If he followed me off the main road, no one would be around to help. Then, as if the situation wasn't already horrifying, he moved into the left lane and began to force me off the road. His massive truck edged closer and closer, pushing me toward the shoulder. I slammed my brakes and swerved behind him. He sped up and returned to the center lane. I didn't have a plan. My heart raced. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I could barely think. But when he moved ahead slightly, I noticed something. His cab was bright red. Even through the rain, I could see the color. I grabbed my phone and snapped pictures through the windshield, using the flashes from my camera, even though the rain blurred the images. Maybe if I captured the truck's identifying marks, I could report him later. Suddenly, the truck slowed dramatically. I swerved into the passing lane and floored it, leaving him behind again. I didn't stop. I didn't even breathe properly until his headlights disappeared entirely. But I wasn't taking any chances. I pulled off the next exit and circled back to the highway on a different ramp. As I merged back onto the highway, I glanced back. The red cab was sitting on the shoulder of the road, headlights off. I kept driving until I reached the next town. At a gas station, I reviewed the photos I had taken. Most were useless, the rain washing out the details. All I could make out was the red cab and the vague shape of the truck. No license plate, no company name. To this day, I don't know what his intentions were, whether it was a failed carjacking, a kidnapping attempt, or something worse. But I do know one thing. That night changed me. Now, I never drive at night without a dash cam. I never dismiss strange behavior on the road, and if I ever see a red cab truck lingering behind me again, I won't hesitate to call the police. Whoever that driver was, let's never meet again. I had always taken on babysitting jobs to help cover my college expenses. This job came through a connection I trusted. One of my professors had asked if I could help out his sister, who had a young son. She needed someone reliable to watch him a few nights a week. The timing worked with my class schedule, and the pay was good. I accepted without hesitation, thinking it would be like any other babysitting job I had done over the years. I had no idea what I was stepping into. The family lived in a quiet, well-maintained neighborhood, in a large house that looked like it had been renovated recently. It was not a mansion, but it was big enough to feel almost intimidating the first time I arrived. The mother, whose name I will leave out, was kind but seemed stressed, probably from work and the demands of raising a young child alone. She welcomed me warmly. Her son was 6 years old, bright-eyed and full of energy. From the first night, things went smoothly. He showed me his toys, we watched cartoons, and when bedtime came, he cooperated without complaint. I would sit in the living room afterward, scrolling through my phone or reading, occasionally listening for any sounds from upstairs. The house always felt unusually quiet after he went to bed. There was an oppressive stillness, but I assumed it was just the difference between being in my small college apartment and a larger, emptier house. One evening, after an hour or so of playing with toy cars, the little boy became excited and told me he had something special to show me. He led me down to the basement. The basement door was narrow and creaked loudly as it opened, revealing a long staircase descending into darkness. At the bottom, the space opened up into a surprisingly clean and spacious area. Dominating one side of the basement was an elaborate train set, spanning the size of 2 large dining tables. It had tracks, a tiny town with buildings, trees, mountains, and a small artificial river. Someone had put an incredible amount of work into it. The level of detail was astonishing. The boy switched on the train set, and the engines began gliding along the track smoothly. Lights flickered on in the miniature train station. It was then that a loud beeping sound blared from the station's control panel. Startled, I turned to the boy, but he quickly silenced the noise. His face grew serious. He whispered that we needed to be quiet because his dad was sleeping. I froze, confused. From everything his mother had told me, she was raising him alone. There had never been any mention of a father, boyfriend, or even a family member staying in the house. I brushed it off at the time. Children often had imaginary friends or created stories that made sense only to them. Perhaps he had invented a pretend father figure. I told myself not to overthink it. We finished playing and returned upstairs. The rest of the night passed without incident. The mother returned home, paid me, and asked how everything had gone. I casually mentioned, almost as a joke, that we had kept quiet so we would not wake his dad. The words left my mouth without much thought. Her reaction was immediate and alarming. She stared at me with wide eyes, confusion and concern flooding her face. She asked me what I meant. I explained that her son had said his dad was sleeping downstairs and that I assumed maybe someone else was living in the house. Her face lost all color. She shook her head and insisted she was not married, had no boyfriend, and that no other adults lived there. She tried to dismiss it with a nervous laugh, saying children sometimes made up things, but the look in her eyes told a different story. I left shortly after, uneasy. I told myself it was just an odd moment, that it probably meant nothing, but I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next time I babysat, I tried to approach the evening with a clear head. I kept the boy upstairs, away from the basement. Still, the quiet of the house pressed in on me. The longer I spent there, the more I felt that someone or something was observing me. Small sounds echoed in the distance, a floorboard creaking here, a faint tapping there. I kept telling myself it was just the natural sounds of an old house settling at night. The little boy did not mention his dad that night, but he frequently glanced toward the basement door. His eyes were wary, almost expectant. as though he was waiting for someone to appear. I began asking around carefully, not wanting to alarm the mother or make her feel judged. One of the other sitters I knew told me she had declined the job after a strange experience of her own. During an introductory visit, the boy had spoken about his dad being in the basement, watching him. That sitter had felt so uncomfortable that she turned down the position. I pressed further, speaking to neighbors and anyone who might know more about the house. It turned out that before the mother and her son had moved in, the house had been rented by an older man who was known to be reclusive. According to what little information I could gather, he had died in the basement from what was believed to be a heart attack or another sudden medical episode. It was a peaceful death, the neighbors said. Nothing sinister. But after hearing that, I started connecting the pieces. The train set was not just an elaborate toy, it was likely built by that man. The detail, the craftsmanship, the care, it was the work of someone who had poured years into the hobby. And now, even after death, his presence lingered in the basement, attached to the one thing he had loved most. I never mentioned any of this to the mother. What could I say? That her son was seeing and speaking to the spirit of a man who had died in their basement? She was already working long hours, raising a child alone, and trying to keep everything together. I could not add to her burdens with stories of ghosts and restless spirits. I did not take any more babysitting shifts at that house. To this day, I often think about the boy and whether he still speaks of his dad. I wonder if the train set still operates at night, if the beeping alarm still sounds, and if someone unseen still stands watch over the little boy and his miniature world. Not every haunting is malicious. Some are simply people who do not realize they have left. Or perhaps they choose not to. But that did not make it any less unsettling to know that when I thought I was alone in that house, I never truly was. I grew up in a small rural area where the nights stretched long and empty, with only the distant lights of farms and small towns breaking up the darkness. When I was 15, my friends and I would spend weekends exploring all the supposedly haunted places around the basin. It had become a tradition as autumn crept in and Halloween loomed closer. We had already exhausted the typical spots, the haunted woods, an abandoned hotel near the Ute Reservation, and a few local ghost stories that amounted to little more than creaky floors and distant shadows. One chilly October night, the group decided to escalate things. Someone suggested Skinwalker Ranch. At the time, I didn't fully grasp the weight of that name. I knew the stories. Everyone did. Tales of strange lights in the sky, creatures that defied explanation, and beings that could wear the skin of men or animals. I thought it was all exaggeration. Stories told to scare tourists and teenagers like us. We piled into a friend's truck, packed a few flashlights, and drove out into the night. The closer we got, the quieter the group became. The hills pressed in around us. Even the most talkative among us sat in uneasy silence. When the driver finally spoke, his voice sounded forced, too casual. He said we were approaching the backside of the ranch through an old access road that few people used anymore. The truck rumbled down a slope, gravel crunching beneath the tires, until we reached a spot where a simple pole and post fence stood. A faded sign warned against trespassing. My friend opened the gate and laid it down carefully so we could cross without making noise. Beyond the fence, an overgrown two-track road stretched into the darkness, swallowed by tall grass and brush. We left the truck behind and followed the path on foot. The moon was hidden behind clouds. Without flashlights, we relied on what little starlight filtered through the overcast sky. It was difficult to see, but somehow that felt safer than casting light into the dark and revealing ourselves. The further we walked, the heavier the air became. Not in a physical sense, but emotionally. Every step seemed to press on my chest. I kept my eyes down, watching my footing. But when I glanced to either side, I noticed something unsettling. There was always a dark shape in the grass off to my left. I told myself it was a cow, perhaps resting in the field, but no matter how far we walked, it stayed with us, keeping pace. After what felt like an eternity, we reached what the driver called the old homestead. It was a cluster of weather-beaten structures, collapsing barns and cabins, all leaning at strange angles like they had been trying to fall for years, but something held them up. The leader of our group raised a hand to stop us. He whispered that we needed to be quiet. If the property owner was nearby, we could be in serious trouble. Just as we were about to move forward again, a deep growl rolled out of the darkness ahead. It was low, guttural, and far too large to be from any dog. The sound froze all of us where we stood. Our fearless leader took a step back. His confidence evaporated. In the tense silence that followed, the group silently agreed. We were going back. We retraced our steps in silence, but the unease never left. When one of my friends asked to stop by a small stream running alongside the path, we all gathered around, trying to make sense of what we had heard. I leaned over the water, trying to calm my nerves, telling myself that whatever had growled was just a territorial animal, something natural, something explainable. Then, as I looked down at the water, I saw a figure standing on the opposite bank. It wasn't a cow or a coyote. It wasn't even fully human. It was tall, too tall, with limbs that seemed too long and too thin. Its skin was dark, almost blending into the night, and it stood unnaturally still. Only its eyes betrayed it, reflecting a dull, amber light from the distant glow of the truck's parking lights. I wasn't the only one who saw it. Another friend beside me gasped. The others followed our gaze, and without a word, we all ran. The weight of the moment was too heavy to bear. We didn't stop until we reached the truck. Hearts pounding, breath ragged, we threw ourselves inside and locked the doors. The leader started the engine, but as the headlights flicked on, we saw something that made every hair on my body stand on end. The dark shape that had followed us through the grass, it wasn't resting in the field anymore. It stood just beyond the edge of the headlights, watching. We sped away, gravel spitting out from under the tires. Nobody spoke until we reached the main road. For a while, I managed to push the memory aside. I told myself it had been a trick of the light, my mind filling in blanks with imagination fueled by too many scary stories. But a few months later, as winter set in, something happened that made me realize the encounter had been real. My best friend and I were sitting in her car outside my house, smoking cigarettes and watching the distant park across the street. It was late, and the park was mostly dark except for a few streetlights. As we talked, we both noticed a pair of eyes glowing in the distance. A deer, we assumed. The animal slowly approached the playground equipment in the center of the park. But then it stood up. The eyes rose, climbing far higher than any deer could stand. It moved toward the old metal slide, standing as tall as the platform itself. The creature walked, upright on two legs. My friend and I sat frozen. The cigarette slipped from my fingers, burning a hole in the floor mat. We watched as the figure crossed the park, stepped over the fence, and disappeared into the neighborhood beyond. We chased after it in the car, but by the time we reached the park, it was gone. Months passed, and we tried to forget. Then, late one evening while visiting her house, we both spotted a pair of glowing red eyes beyond her backyard fence. They were too high off the ground to belong to any animal native to the area. They watched us silently. We both retreated into the house and locked the doors. That night, neither of us slept. Years later, I spoke with a member of the Ute tribe who worked with me. When I mentioned the ranch and our experiences, she listened quietly before saying something that chilled me to the bone. "It isn't what's on the ranch you need to fear," she said softly. "It's what follows you home." We had gone looking for something to scare us. We had found it. And worse, we had brought it back. That night at Skinwalker Ranch was not just an adventure. It was an invitation. Something had seen us, and it had not forgotten. I had just moved into a third-floor apartment. It was not luxurious, but it was finally my own space, a milestone I had worked toward for years. I spent my first few weeks there unpacking slowly, placing books and trinkets where I wanted them, setting up shelves and curtains. Most of the boxes stayed untouched in the spare room. Life kept me too busy to fully settle in. Shortly after moving in, I became seriously ill. My condition worsened rapidly, forcing me to leave the apartment and stay with my parents while I underwent treatment. The doctors thought it was temporary. It was not. Weeks turned into months. I returned only once or twice to pick up small things and check the mail. The apartment stood mostly untouched, just as I had left it. At least, that was what I thought. When I was finally well enough to move back, I discovered the first violation. Someone had been inside. Not family, not friends. A stranger. I noticed it the moment I opened the door. Things were not where I had left them. The kitchen towels had been moved, small trinkets shifted, drawers were left slightly ajar. But the most disturbing part was not what was out of place, it was what was missing. The intruder had not taken valuables. My television was still mounted to the wall. The laptop, though dusty, still sat on my desk. A jar of cash that I kept on the dresser was untouched. Instead, every single one of my diaries was gone. Not just one or two, all of them. I had kept diaries since I was a teenager. Small, identical notebooks lined with neat, slanted handwriting. I had packed them separately in different boxes, scattered throughout the apartment. Whoever had been inside had gone through every box and taken only the diaries. Even my DIY notebooks and recipe journals, similar in size and appearance, had been opened and left behind. Only the diaries were missing. I reported the break-in, but the police found no sign of forced entry. The front door was intact. No locks had been broken. The balcony doors were also locked. I began to wonder if I had made some mistake. Had I given a spare key to someone and forgotten? Had I left a window unlocked? But the possibility of an accident did not explain the precision. Whoever entered my home had spent time searching carefully for the diaries and nothing else. For weeks I tried to push it from my mind. I changed the locks, added a chain latch, and bought a small security camera for the hallway. I avoided staying home after dark. But the sense of violation lingered, crawling just beneath the surface of my thoughts. Then came the second intrusion. I had spent the evening at a friend's house and returned home after midnight. As I approached my door, I noticed the porch light that usually illuminated my entryway was off. I frowned, assuming the bulb had burned out. It was an annoyance, but not alarming. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. When I flipped the light switch, nothing happened. It was not until I glanced at the microwave and saw the clock still glowing the correct time that I realized the power was not out. My skin prickled. I turned toward the hallway light. Again, nothing. One by one, I tried every switch in the apartment. None worked. That was when I noticed the light bulbs. Each one had been carefully unscrewed just enough to break the contact and prevent illumination. Someone had deliberately moved through the apartment, unscrewing every bulb. My stomach turned as I backed toward the door. I stepped outside and called the property's on-call maintenance number. The man arrived quickly, a flashlight in hand. I told him what I had found. He offered to search the apartment while I waited outside. He returned minutes later with a grim expression. He told me to call the police immediately. The officers arrived and conducted a thorough search. This time, too, they found no sign of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen or disturbed aside from the light bulbs. But the implication was clear. Someone had been inside while I was gone. They had wanted to create darkness, to catch me unaware when I returned. After the police left, I stayed at a friend's place for the night. My sister and her boyfriend came the next day with tools and supplies. They installed heavy-duty deadbolts on both the front and back doors, even though it technically violated the apartment's policies. When I explained the situation to the property manager, she did not scold me. Instead, she admitted that she was also unsettled by what had happened. Nothing else occurred for the next 2 years. I continued living in that apartment, though never in peace. Every sound in the hallway, every unexpected creak set my nerves on edge. The security camera I installed never captured anyone tampering with the door, but sometimes it would shut off or glitch without explanation. I never recovered my diaries. I often wondered why someone would take them. They held nothing of monetary value. They were simply pages of my thoughts, memories, and reflections. Intimate, yes, but worthless to anyone else, unless the person who took them was not looking for value. Perhaps they wanted to know me, to read my most private words, to understand my life, my fears, my hopes, or perhaps they wanted to control me. Even now, years later, the thought of those missing diaries haunts me more than any physical threat. I can protect my home with locks and cameras. I can install alarms and deadbolts. But I cannot reclaim the pieces of myself that were stolen. I will never know who took them or why. And that uncertainty is the worst violation of all. My family lived in a rough neighborhood when I was 7 years old. The houses were close together, their yards divided by aging fences and overgrown hedges. Noise was a constant presence. Sirens in the distance, the occasional shouting match from down the block, dogs barking at stray cats or each other. Despite that, our home felt like a safe haven. My parents worked hard to make sure it stayed that way. That night, it was just my mom, my siblings, and me at home. My dad had left for a business trip earlier that day. The house had settled into its usual nighttime quiet. My younger brother and sister were already asleep, and my mom was watching television while I played quietly in my room. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. At first, it was soft. A few gentle raps, the kind that suggested a neighbor asking to borrow something or a delivery left on the porch. My mom muted the television and approached the door cautiously. She asked who was there. No answer came. She peered through the peephole but saw no one. She hesitated for a few moments, then shrugged it off, thinking it might have been a child playing a prank. It would not have been the first time. The neighborhood kids sometimes amused themselves with harmless mischief. She returned to the couch. 30 minutes later, another knock came. This time, louder, slower, more deliberate. She approached the door again, this time pulling aside the curtain covering the small window next to it. The porch light illuminated the empty front step. No figure stood there. The night was still and quiet. A sense of unease settled in. She waited by the door for a few minutes, listening intently. Nothing stirred outside. Assuming it was just another prank, or perhaps even the wind knocking a branch against the door, she went back to her spot on the couch. But her instincts were alert now. Not long after, the knocking returned. This time it was steady and heavy, like a fist pounding the wood. She did not hesitate. She grabbed my dad's shotgun, which he kept loaded and nearby when he traveled, and sat in the dark living room with it across her lap. The curtains remained open just enough for her to watch the porch. The knocking stopped. Several long minutes passed. Then a scraping sound came from the side of the house, slow, prolonged, like something being dragged along the siding. My mom's breath caught in her throat. She stood, shotgun ready, and moved to the nearest window. Pressing her face against the glass, she strained to see into the darkness. Streetlights did little to cut through the shadows between the houses. Movement caught her eye. Someone was there. A tall figure moved along the side of the house, pausing by the windows as if listening or watching. She could not make out details, just the broad shape and the sense of someone trying to stay hidden. She called out, warning that she was armed and had already called the police. Her voice was strong, but inside she was terrified. The figure paused, then retreated into the shadows. She immediately phoned the police. It took them nearly 2 hours to arrive. Our neighborhood was not a high-priority area. and late-night calls often took longer to receive a response. My mom stayed vigilant at the window the entire time, shotgun in hand. When the officers arrived, they searched the perimeter of the house. At first, they found nothing out of the ordinary. But near the front door, in the bushes by the steps, they discovered something chilling. A length of barbed wire, nearly 4 feet long, coiled neatly as though prepared for use. They showed it to my mom and asked if it belonged to anyone in the house. She shook her head, heart sinking. The officer told her that whoever had been knocking was not playing a prank. They had come with the intent to harm, perhaps to strangle or restrain. The police promised to patrol the neighborhood for the rest of the night and advised my mom to keep the shotgun nearby and to keep all doors and windows locked tight. The next morning, in daylight, the officers returned to conduct a more thorough search. They found footprints around the house leading to the back where my bedroom window was located. The windowsill bore fresh marks, scratches where someone had tried to pry it open. The attempt had failed, but the intention had been clear. Whoever it was had planned to break in if no one answered the door. My mom gathered us together and told us the truth. Someone had tried to enter our home that night. We were lucky the locks had held. We were lucky she had stayed awake. We moved out shortly after. My parents did not explain the urgency, but I understood. Even at 7 years old, I grasped that our home had been violated. That no matter how many locks or alarms we installed, the sense of safety had been shattered. I often think back to that night. I wonder if the person had been watching our home for days, waiting for my dad to leave. I wonder what might have happened if my mom had not acted as quickly as she did. And when I hear knocks at the door now, especially late at night, I hesitate. I wait. I check. Because I learned early that not every knock comes from someone you want to meet. I had been working in law enforcement for almost 6 years. By then, I had learned that the nights were often quiet until they were not. Calls could come in waves or remain still as the grave for hours. But there was one type of call that never sat right with me, the kind that gave the most seasoned officers a feeling deep in their bones, a simple 911 hang-up. That night, I was riding two-man, sharing the cruiser with another officer. The shift had been uneventful so far. The hours dragged by beneath a clear summer sky, the stars sharp and cold above the dark outlines of homes and wooded lots. Around 2 in the morning, dispatch notified us of a 911 hang-up call. The address was unfamiliar to me, and in my small jurisdiction, that was rare. The address was for an isolated property at the end of a narrow dirt road. We had driven past it countless times, but had never been called there. The road was chained off with a rusted metal gate and a faded no trespassing sign. Regulations required us to investigate, so we left the cruiser behind and proceeded on foot. The dirt road stretched for about 100 yards, flanked on both sides by tall chain-link fencing. As we walked, I felt the discomfort that comes from walking a funnel with no cover. If someone waited for us at the end with bad intentions, we had nowhere to go. We emerged into a clearing with 2 houses facing each other. Both were small and in varying states of disrepair. As we approached, I scanned the nearest house. Movement caught my eye. Someone inside. A man and a woman soon stepped out to meet us. They looked surprised but not alarmed. We explained why we were there. The man informed us that his house was number 124, and the one across from them was 125, which had been vacant for months. The address dispatch had given us was 123. The man pointed north into a patch of dense woods and weeds. Hidden deep inside, he said, was the 3rd house, the one matching our call. He described it as old, abandoned, and barely standing. Accessing it would require cutting through thick brush and overgrown trails. He guessed it sat about 2 football fields away. As we gathered our gear, dispatch reported 2 more hang-up calls from the same address. No voice, no background noise, just a connection and a disconnection. We called for backup. Another unit arrived and 4 of us set off into the woods. The path was almost non-existent. Tree branches clawed at our arms and faces. Spiderwebs clung to our uniforms. We followed what remained of an old trail, barely more than a depression in the ground, until the house emerged through the trees. It was the kind of place that looked wrong even in daylight. At night, it was a nightmare. The structure leaned heavily to one side. A tree had fallen through the roof long ago and now merged with what remained of the rafters. The walls sagged and buckled, held together more by stubbornness than design. Ivy and vines wrapped around the exterior like fingers trying to pull the house into the earth. There was no sign of life, no lights, no sounds. We pushed inside cautiously. Debris covered the floor, rotted wood, broken glass, crumbling bricks. The smell of mold and decay pressed close around us. Every step stirred dust into the air, thick and choking. We checked the front room, empty. The kitchen, empty. A hallway led to 2 small bedrooms. They were filled with more debris and collapsed furniture. No one had lived here for years, possibly decades. But the air felt wrong, as though the house itself held its breath, waiting for something. We swept the entire structure twice. Nothing. No squatters. No signs of recent human activity. We reported back to dispatch. As we stepped outside, the radio crackled again. Another hang-up call from the same address. This time, dispatch added that they had called the number back, and for the first time someone answered. On the line, they could hear what sounded like a child's voice playing in the background, but no one spoke directly into the phone. The 4 of us exchanged glances. None of us wanted to go back into that house. We had done our duty. We had cleared the scene, but none of us could deny the chill creeping into our thoughts. After discussing it briefly, we cleared the call and returned to our vehicles. That should have been the end of it. But 6 months later, another hang-up came from the same address. This time, I was with 3 other officers who had never been to the property before. When I told them what had happened during the previous call, they were eager to see for themselves. We walked the same path through the dead trees. The brush had thinned out in the winter cold, making the journey easier. When we reached the house, it looked even worse than before. The roof had caved in further. The walls listed more dangerously. It would not survive another year without collapsing entirely. 3 of the officers insisted on going inside. I stayed at the door. I had already seen enough. They did not stay long. The floor had become too unstable, and the structure too unsafe. Even they felt the weight of something unexplainable pressing down on the property. We returned to the cruisers. That time, there was no child's voice on the line. No more calls came through that night. Over the years, I have answered many calls that turned out to be nothing. False alarms, pranks, misunderstandings. But I know what I heard in that report, the voice of a child playing somewhere that no living child should have been. That house had stood abandoned for a long time, but not empty. Never truly empty. I have never returned. The property is still there, crumbling into the ground, waiting. Sometimes, when I drive past the old dirt road and see the rusted chain and the no trespassing sign, I think about that child's voice. And I wonder if anyone has finally picked up the phone and stayed long enough to listen. It was late fall when I moved into the small rental house on the outskirts of town. The landlord was eager to have someone occupy it, offering a discounted rate and flexible lease. I should have wondered why. Instead, I signed without hesitation. I was fresh out of a long relationship, eager for solitude and a clean start. The house itself was plain, a single story with faded white siding and a sagging porch. Behind it stretched acres of open field, brown and brittle from the season's first frost. Beyond the field stood another house, larger, 2 stories, dark windows facing mine like eyes watching from a distance. I noticed it the first evening, standing at my kitchen window. The other house looked abandoned. Its paint had peeled to bare wood in places. Shutters hung crookedly, some missing altogether. No cars in the driveway, no lights in the windows. Still, it seemed like someone had lived there once not too long ago. My landlord mentioned nothing about neighbors when he handed me the keys. The first week passed quietly. I spent my evenings unpacking boxes and rearranging furniture. The nights were still, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the dry grass. The nearest occupied house was a quarter-mile up the road, and that suited me just fine. But as the days grew shorter, I began to feel uneasy about the house across the field. Sometimes at dusk, I thought I saw movement in the upstairs window. Just a faint shifting of shadows, like someone passing by. I told myself it was the changing light, the way it played tricks on the eyes. A tree branch swaying, perhaps. Nothing more. But the feeling of being watched never left me. One evening, as I closed the blinds, I noticed a faint glow in one of the upstairs windows of the house across the field. A dim, flickering light, like that of a candle or lantern. I stared at it for several long minutes. It did not move. By morning, the light was gone. I convinced myself that someone was staying there temporarily. A squatter, maybe. Someone with nowhere else to go. It wasn't my business. The property wasn't mine. As long as they left me alone, I would leave them alone. But the light returned the next night, and the next. Always in the same window. Always flickering faintly until dawn. Then came the footprints. It had rained overnight, leaving the field muddy. When I stepped out the back door one morning, I noticed a trail of footprints in the soft earth. They led from the edge of my porch straight across the field to the neighboring house. Bare feet. I followed the trail only part way before my nerves got the better of me. The prints were deep, the toes splayed unnaturally wide. They continued in a direct line, unwavering, disappearing into the tall grass near the other house. I returned to my porch, heart pounding. I wanted to call someone, the landlord, the police. But what would I say? That someone had walked barefoot across a field? That a distant house had a flickering light at night? It wasn't enough. That evening I stayed up late, watching the house across the field. The light returned at dusk, glowing steadily. Around midnight it dimmed. As I leaned closer to the window trying to see any movement inside, a figure stepped into the frame. A tall silhouette, featureless against the glow behind it. It stood perfectly still, facing my house. I pulled the blinds closed and locked the doors. My breath came fast and shallow. I checked every window, every latch. Nothing seemed disturbed. The next morning I found new footprints. They circled the house, passing beneath each window, pausing by the doors. Always barefoot, always those same unnaturally wide impressions in the dirt. I called the landlord. He sounded surprised but unconcerned. Said the house across the field had been empty for years. Told me the last occupant had been an old man who passed away, and no one had claimed the property since. I asked about the light in the window. He said the electricity had been shut off long ago. That night I set up a chair by the kitchen window, flashlight and phone within reach. The light returned, steady as always, but no figure appeared. Around 2 a.m, a sound startled me, a soft tap against the glass of the kitchen window. I turned slowly. Outside the window, pressed against the glass, was a pale hand. Long fingers splayed wide. The skin looked damp, almost translucent. Before I could react, the hand withdrew. I ran to the back door and threw it open, shining my flashlight across the yard. The footprints were back. I followed them a few steps, but they led away quickly, vanishing into the darkness of the field. The next day I packed a bag and left. I told the landlord I would not be staying, gave no further explanation, and he did not ask for one. Weeks later, curiosity overcame fear. I returned during the day, parked on the side of the road, and approached the house across the field. Its windows were empty and dark. The door hung slightly open, creaking in the breeze. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and decay. Dust covered the floors, undisturbed except for a set of faint, wide footprints leading from the front door up the staircase. I did not follow them. Instead, I glanced into the front room. On the floor lay a pile of melted wax, the remains of a large candle burned down to nothing. Above it, on the wall, someone had scratched a message into the plaster. "I see you." I turned and left without looking back. To this day, I do not know who or what had been watching from that house. I do not intend to find out.